Can you hear me?
I can hear you speak a little bit more just because of the crowd.
Yeah, no worries.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Thanks,
All
Angie.
right, perfect. Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
Going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order for October Second, thanks everyone for joining us. We are also joined remotely via the internet. So welcome to those that aren't here in person. Thank you for those that did attend in person this evening. We'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance, and just for the record, Giuseppe Caltabiano is excused from tonight's meeting. Dakota, do you mind leading us in the pledge this evening? Someone. Hopefully I don't hear about this at the office tomorrow. We'll move on to our one presentation of the evening. We have Kim Morisaki with the Northwest Community Land Trust, who will provide a presentation on the Montana ground lease restriction pertaining to the Trailview subdivision. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you for having me. I will try to make this fairly quick. If I go too fast and you have questions, please interrupt me and ask. I'm with the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust. We have 52 properties in Kalispell that we started purchasing with Neighborhood Stabilization Program funds right after the last real estate meltdown that we had. So the organization started in 2009. The beauty of a land trust, and this is a model that's been around for 50 years, they're all over the country. The beauty of them is that the land trust separates the title of the land underneath the home and the title for the home itself. The land trust holds the land in perpetuity as an asset for the community, and only the home is bought and sold. So by taking the land value out of the cost of the home, you immediately lower the cost for somebody to purchase it. Then, on top of that, the homeowner signs a ground lease. They pay, in our case, $25 a month to lease the ground. And they agree when they sign the ground lease that they understand that they're buying a home below market rate, and that when they sell it, they will also sell it below market rate to somebody who is considered an eligible purchaser. In our case, we have requirements that our buyers are below 120% area median income for their household size. We have some other restrictions as well. And in our case, in Kalispell, we've been setting our repurchase price at 100% of what the original buyer paid for the home, plus 25% of the increase in the appraised value over time. So always the market rate is going like this, but the home price of the land trust home is just going up like this. So lots of the benefits of being a homeowner. You're able to get in at a lower cost. You get out at a lower cost as well, but you're still able to take some cash with you when you sell. Other land trusts do something very similar to your deed restriction at Trailview, which is just a 3% annual. Take a base cost and add 3% every year to the price, so that when the homeowner wants to sell it, they know exactly what they can sell it for. And that's a great model as well. What we were able to do in 2009 to 2012, 2015 was buy 52 homes, separate them, rehab them, separate the titles, sell them, buy more, sell them, till we had 52. The market is completely different now than it was then, as I'm sure you're well aware. And so about 2 years ago, I started looking at how to continue to add inventory to the land trust in a new way, because what we had done 10 or 15 years ago wasn't going to work now. There are no houses on the foreclosure market. So I am a big fan of public-private partnerships. I love it when you can bring government, nonprofits, and private people all together and solve problems. And so I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Jerry Dunker by folks on the Whitefish Housing Authority board. And Jerry and I talked, and in this kind of market, to do a land trust kind of project, you need a very patient developer, and I found that in Jerry. And he was willing to work with me to potentially add some of the homes in Trailview that are already deed restricted into the land trust inventory. Now you might be thinking, why would we need to add homes that are already deed restricted into the land trust? And it's a good question. I brought some numbers for you today, just to give us an example. Currently, a deed restricted home in Trailview to be sold this year or next is somewhere between $398,000 up to about $450,000, give or take. Now that's still a bargain, because market rate, they're at $600,000 easily. So that's great, except for the problem is, who can buy a $428,000 house? Not somebody who's at 80% area median income, or really, quite frankly, anybody who's even at 120% area median income. The beauty of layering in the land trust is that you take the value of the house out, or the value of the land out, and suddenly you're starting to bring the price down to a price that somebody who's at 80 or 120% area median income can actually get a mortgage for. I'll give you some examples. Somebody who's at 80% area median income might be a single professional who works for the Forest Service or is an executive director for a nonprofit foundation. Or it could be a family where one spouse works as a mechanic and one spouse works as maybe works at the deli at one of the grocery stores. A police officer and a high school teacher, probably with several kids, they're below 120% area median income. A single person who makes $45,000 a year will be lucky, will have done everything right to be able to get a $200,000 or a $225,000 mortgage. Somebody who's at 120, high school teacher, police officer, they'll be lucky if they can get in at a $325,000 mortgage. So I absolutely love what's happening at Trailview. I'm asking you to allow us to add a little more cash. We're willing to bring $75,000 per house that has been donated through our work with the Whitefish Community Foundation, so private donations. And we're also able to bring some funds from the state of Montana's Department of Commerce Housing Division, up to $90,000 per house, home buyers assistance funds. So by allowing us to put these houses into the community land trust, we're able to bring the price down farther to a price that people who I think are in your workforce and who you want to encourage to live in Whitefish can actually get a mortgage for. So, Angela did a wonderful job showing the difference between our ground lease and your deed restriction, and we're very happy to edit our ground lease to coincide with your deed restriction. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions for Kim on her presentation? Steve?
Just what happens to the land? How long do you hold it?
We hold it forever. The nonprofit just puts it on we put it on our asset sheet, and it stays on the asset sheet forever and ever.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Not seeing any. You do have Angie's report enclosed with the packet, and she is respectfully recommending that we approve the release of the deed restrictions on both properties, and I would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Very much. We'll move on to communications from the public. We do have 5 public hearings advertised for this evening, so if you're here to speak on one of those public hearings, please wait until I call that hearing. But if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity. Name and address for the record when you approach the podium. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead. I first want to say that I was glad I got to join you just now on the tour of the sewage treatment plant. Cody was delightful to meet with the operator. I think I've got his name right. And was very informative. I think the city and the management team there, Craig, all need the appreciation of the public that it's a really impressive facility. On the other hand, we are also still tracking the proposal for the county where they have recently bought some property near the Lakeside Sewer and Water District, where they are proposing to build a compost facility, and the liquid from that would go to the Lakeside Sewer and Water District for treatment. Those plans continue to change, and while I think this council, or at least Craig, spoke in favor of that facility, we continue to be very concerned about the changes that are being proposed. Because unlike the system that you have, Lakeside will is applying for groundwater injection of the water that they will be collecting both from their sewer lines and from the compost facility. So we're tracking that very carefully. We think the cities need to look at that as well. And when it comes up for public comment, we all need to look at the water quality and the impact on Flathead Lake, which this is just barely a mile above, and shallow groundwater in that area. So I would encourage you to watch that process, and we'll certainly be keeping you aware as well. We are also encouraging the county to consider the purchase of another piece of property where they could locate this facility, and that would allow them to hook on to the Kalispell sewage treatment plant, which we think is a much more appropriate place to deposit the liquid from a compost facility. We still have very serious concerns about the compost facility, because as you compost biosolids, it concentrates the pharmaceutical PFAS, forever chemicals, in that compost. And if you've looked at national news, you know, all across the country, communities that have taken their biosolids, composted them, and farmers have bought them, have found that it has contaminated their lands to the point that they can't grow crops there. And so states like Maine have passed laws banning the use of biosolids on farmland. And so there's a lot of complicated issues with how we dispose of our solid waste, particularly our poop. And I think it deserves more concern and issues. There's going to be a presenter here later this month talking about the issues with pharmaceuticals in rivers and lake and water bodies, and we'll be getting you information about that. But again, it's something that we all need to start watching and looking for solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Further public comment this evening?
Hi, everyone. Leonette Galaz, 265 Colorado Avenue, D4. I just wanted to make a comment about I sit with a position on the Whitefish Community Housing Committee. And so I was asking about, in that committee, the opportunity to have that meeting be available to the public via Zoom or some kind of, online video format. And the city was telling me that they were doing that during COVID, and then that city council made some decisions to stop putting committee meetings, such as that one, on video. And so I'm just here to make a recommendation that we go back to that. The technology exists. It's not that hard to do. It's not a big lift from the city as far as I can tell. I can be told different, but that's what it seems like from where I'm from. And anything for an issue that's so important to the community right now, I think any opportunity to increase transparency, opportunities for participation and public comment, and the opportunity to hold that committee, especially because this committee isn't elected, so the opportunity to hold us accountable by the public is a good thing. So that's just my recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. Who's next? Michelle, anyone online wishing to provide comment this evening?
For those of you who are attending virtually, if you'd like to speak towards anything that is not a public hearing, please raise your hand. I think we're good. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Michelle. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our consent agenda. You do have the September 18th, 2023 regular meeting as well as work session minutes enclosed with the packet. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously, Michelle, which brings us fairly quickly onto our first of 5 public hearings this evening. We'll start with Resolution 21-32, if I can read my own writing. A resolution to annex and incorporate within the boundaries of the city of Whitefish by petition and consent of the property owner approximately 11.63 acres of land known as Tract 1 of Certificate of Survey 10316, addressed as 5975 Highway 93 South in Section 12, Township 30 North, Range 22 West in Whitefish, and zone the property to WBT, which is our business transitional district, based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the following. Number 1, upgrade the portion of Emerald Drive within the annexation area to Highway 93 South to city street standards, including curb, gutter, and street lights on both sides and sidewalk, street trees, boulevard on the north side with phase 1 of the project. And number 2, maintenance of the Highway 93 shared path, the sidewalk on Emerald Drive, the street trees, and all internal landscaping and circulation is the responsibility of the property owner. Good evening, Wendy.
Good evening. So before you tonight, again, is annexation and applying zoning. So this is the third one that you've seen with this new format where we hold the public hearing and the annexation all under one public hearing. And then when you act, it is so. So again, the application is the corner of Highway 93 South and Highway 40. Currently, the property has a Flathead County zoning of B4 with an HO, which is their secondary business with a highway overlay zone. And they are proposing the WBT, which is our business transitional zone. At our September 5th meeting on your consent agenda, you did adopt a resolution of intent to annex and rezone, and then tonight is the actual public hearing. And again, we are offering 2 recommended conditions of approval, which the mayor mentioned in the opening statements. The property is surrounded by residential on the east side and then commercial on 3 sides of the property. It is undeveloped and a little bit more than 10 acres. The property is within the urban services area. The property is served by Highway 93 South, Highway 40, and then there is a little portion of Emerald Drive along the kind of bisecting the south portion of the project. Emerald Drive is a paved 21 feet in width with no improvements on it. There's no sidewalks or curb or gutter or streetlights. And the city will annex this portion, and the county road, it is a county road, will become a city street. The property doesn't have currently water and sewer at the property, but it is nearby and to the north of the subject property. Also included with this annexation and rezone is a development agreement. And a development agreement, while signed, is still in a draft state until you folks approve it, of course. This is not a requirement for annexation, but was a tool that we all felt might be helpful for you as you're making your decision to annex and rezone, to give you a clear sense of what the proposed possible development could be. Because of the SB 245, allowing multifamily in all of our commercial zones, there will be no more further review of multifamily in this area. All the other WBT zoning things still apply, so all the different conditional uses that were in that zoning district would still apply. So again, this agreement is draft until approved by the council. Within the development agreement, they're proposing to build no more than 210 dwelling units, develop no more than 15,000 square feet of commercial space, which would be ground floor above residential, which mixed use is also part of that Senate bill that was passed. They want to provide some amenities to the residents, including open space, workout facilities, playgrounds, associated equipment, dog park, internal sidewalks, a bus stop, and improve the crosswalk at Highway 40. They're also proposing to construct a shared use path along Highway 93 South from Emerald Heights Drive down to Highway 40. The development is proposing to participate in the Legacy Home Program, which would have 10% deed restricted affordable housing. And so at the maximum of 210, that would be 21 units. And then in exchange for that, they would be asking for the 40-foot building height, which is one of those incentives that are offered when people provide affordable housing. So staff has reviewed the development agreement, and overall we're comfortable with this agreement. We would suggest some amendments for item number 12 to have two-way vehicular traffic installed between 40 and Emerald Drive, the entirety along Highway 93 as the project's getting built, so there's access for the fire department and the folks that are living there. And then we'd like to see the path installed from Emerald Drive to Highway 93 West with Phase 1, the path along Highway 93. This development agreement doesn't preclude the city from enforcing all of our regular regulations, the engineering standards, the building code, the zoning code. One of the comments you received was that they're not proposing to do a subdivision, so we can't require a TIS, and that's not correct. A TIS is in the engineering standards, and any project that has 200 or more trips, we will require a TIS, so it doesn't have to have a subdivision. We've had building permits that have had to do TISs. But there will still be engineering review, building plan review. There was a suggestion in the development agreement to clarify item G, which is on page 96 of your packet. It wasn't clear that what this was referencing was that Senate Bill 245, that multifamily is a permitted use, because the final sentence talks about, therefore, this development is not subject to conditional use or planned unit development. I mean, that can be clarified to be the multifamily aspect of this development is not further subject to conditional use permit or PUD, and that would be an acceptable amendment for us. So again, we're reviewing this according to the annexation policy that you folks approved a few months ago, as well as the Highway 93 South Plan, which is an amendment to the growth policy, the 2000 growth policy. As part of that growth policy, Highway 93 South, this area is designated as transitional business, or highway transitional, sorry. And then in February of this year, you folks adopted the WBT zoning to implement that land use designation. So again, the current zoning is a WB4 with an HO, which is really more consistent with our WB2 zoning, because it offers a lot of the same kind of conditional and permitted uses, but the WBT is more in compliance with our growth policy and Highway 93 South plan. The WBT zoning was amended by council in August to comply with Senate Bill 245, requiring multifamily, which is 5 or more units, to be a use by right in all commercial zones and to require no more than 1 parking space per unit. So that has been changed. The different review criteria, zoning upon annexation, it does comply with item number C, which is be consistent with the land use and zoning recommendations for the subject area as set forth in the growth policy. And so the highway transitional and the WBT are consistent with each other. So based on that, staff is recommending approval of the annexation and the zoning upon annexation. We did notice the neighbors, and we received a number of comments, and a lot of them this weekend. So hopefully you had a chance to look at those, because there was about 43 comments, I believe. There was a lot of comments in support of the annexation, noting that it is proposed to develop important housing and affordable housing in particular. And then there was folks that were concerned about the annexation and rezone and concerned with actually the development proposal itself. So hopefully you've had a chance to review those. Can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? We'll start with Frank.
Wendy, a pretty fundamental question is, I know that we now have a development agreement that is in draft form that you're somewhat comfortable with. We've obviously identified a couple of things that need to be changed in it here. What concerns me is that our resolution and the annexation the development agreement is not integral to, or nor does it seem to me to be a condition of having an appropriate development agreement for this piece of property as a condition of our annexing it. Am I missing something?
Sorry, I guess I'm not entirely.
You're not following me, that's
No, so,
fine.
so once the annexation gets approved, the resolution that the property's been annexed gets recorded, and accompanying that will be all the annexation documents and that development agreement, the one that you, in your final form that you guys are satisfied with. It'll all get recorded on the property.
Okay, but.
It accompanies, it's a party
So
of the packet.
what I hear you're saying is if we approve the annexation this evening, it's what I'll call a tentative annexation pending the completion of and the signing of the development agreement associated with the property. Is that correct?
We'll have Angie answer that.
Yeah, I can answer that, Frank. So you guys would be approving the development agreement as well. They can be recorded as separate documents, which Michelle and I talked about, that we would prefer that they be recorded as separate documents. So the development agreement doesn't get sort of lost in the chain of title. I believe Citizens for a Better Flathead suggested that compliance with the development agreement be a condition of annexation. I don't necessarily think that's necessary, but I don't think it hurts at all. It gives me no heartburn to make that compliance with that development agreement a condition of annexation.
So that's something that we could add this evening? Okay, thank you.
So in a follow-up to that, so hypothetically, if the land doesn't transfer through sale, or the developer who purchases the land doesn't see through with the development agreement and those requirements, and that becomes null and void, the annexation's essentially null and void as well, correct, including the zoning?
I don't think so. I think if they want to
That's
change.
your ultimate question,
Right.
correct? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll let Angie talk then.
Sure. Oh, no worries. No, I mean, the development agreement will go with the property. It will, be recorded on that piece of property. It will go with that property. So ultimately, if somebody decides not to go through with that, or, we can't force them to build on their property. It's just like a CUP or a PUD. We can give approval, but we can't say, but you must build this. If they decide to build something else, then they're going to have to come back to the city and we're going to have to renegotiate a development agreement. Kind of the purpose of the development agreement, and they're not required by state law, they're actually not required by our code as well. Kind of a catch-22 because what we've seen you folks go through is these annexation requests and you have no idea what's going to be there. So really what's in front of you right now is not so much the details of the development itself. It was just meant to give you guys some assurances of this is what the developer plans to do in the future. And if those plans change, then they're going to come back to the city. Again, what we've seen in that area before is a piece of property where, they didn't have a vision, they didn't have a sense of what was going to go. So when you folks are trying to make a meaningful decision about annexation, it's kind of hard if you don't see what may be there. It will run with the property, and if the plans do change in the future, it will be a discussion with the city again.
Go ahead, Frank.
So if I can paraphrase what we're saying, I like your term, it will run with the property, which means if this developer or this owner decides he's going to sell the property and sell the development, that development agreement goes with the property as essentially a piece of zoning. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Is that essentially what we've got, Angie? Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Thanks, Frank. Steve?
I need a second to rephrase my question.
Okay, we'll go with Ben then.
So Wendy, just to make sure I've got the right procedural understanding, this is the only hearing this project has. There's
Correct.
no conditional use, there's no PUD,
Well,
there's nothing like that.
They still have to abide by the WBT zone, and there are a whole host of CUP. You'll remember that you took a lot of the permitted uses and put them in the conditional use category. The only thing that's not going to require a conditional use or a PUD is multifamily, because the state law changed and they took that right away from us.
So, but the commercial
The
aspect,
commercial aspect, you'll still have to go through all the different things here. The only permitted things they could do is a daycare. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, so, but all the other things are, yeah, they're conditional uses.
Okay. So so for the development agreement, does this agreement, it obviously narrows the property rights on the property by some degree, because it says you have to build this, right? But does it expand the property, like, is there anything in this agreement that is beyond what you could do in the transitional zoning district without the agreement?
No.
Okay, so it's narrowing down what can be done on the property,
I
not,
don't know if it's narrowing it down, it's more of a showing you how it could be done,
or how it will be done.
or how it will be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, their intent, yeah.
Okay. What about the part that, didn't we have like a square footage limitation in that zoning district?
Yeah, I think there's a maximum of 15,000 square feet, and if it's above 7,500, it requires a CUP.
So what,
But
Ben, I
again-
can weigh in.
Oh,
yeah, please do.
So part of the problem that Senate Bill 245 has presented us is that we did, require CUP for 7,500 or above square foot. The way I read the state law is pretty cut and dry, is we have to allow multifamily and multi-use, and we cannot place those kind of limitations. We just can't require a conditional use permit for it anymore. I actually ran that by Kelly Lynch. She's the executive director of the Montana League of Cities and Towns. She used to be their legal counsel. She reads it the same way. Unfortunately, that law is, not very specific as to whether we can require CUPs for a certain building footprint. But that's kind of the League of Cities and Towns interpretation too. So I guess it is what it is. I don't know that it was stellar legislative drafting, but it's what we're stuck with.
What about, I don't know what the footages of these buildings are, but if there's more than 15,000 square feet of commercial, where does that put us? And where I'm going with that is, what does that mean for all the other parcels south of, are they all subject to the 15,000 foot, but this one isn't? Or how do we think about that?
Well, if they get zoned to WBT, yes, they'll be subject to the, greater than 7,500 requires a CUP, less than 15,000. But yeah, the mixed-use building, I mean, I think that's kind of a question that we'll have to, because mixed-use multifamily is one of the permitted uses the state legislature gave us, so. I mean, I think that's kind of a question. I think if it's 100% commercial, then definitely we'll be doing a CUP, but with the combo multifamily commercial, I think that's a bit of a question.
My next question would be for Craig.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, please do,
Just
John.
one.
Go ahead.
So clarify, Wendy, if this development moves forward with a building size between 7,500 or greater than 7,500, it will require a CUP and it will not.
It will not, because it's multifamily.
Okay.
And that bill's not letting us do
Okay,
that.
thank you.
But
What,
I'm just going to read you guys the law. It might help actually clarify that part, because mixed use is actually permitted as well, as long as there's residential units. And they have a threshold of the percentage of square foot that the bill has. So if your non-residential uses are less than 50% of the total square footage of the building, and you have residential and non-residential there, then it is permitted by right. And so that was the state law change, and that's just what the definition of mixed-use development is in that bill.
thanks, Dana.
So just to further clarify, if somebody wanted to build a Walmart and put an apartment in it, can they do that?
That wouldn't be considered more than 50% residential,
Okay,
above ground floor retail too.
so 50% by square footage.
Yep, total square footage. And on the second, has to be on the second floor.
Okay.
And we don't allow retail out there anyway.
yeah, but to belabor even worse point is, but if the uses that are going into the commercial area would require a conditional use,
Yep,
those will come to us.
for sure. Yep. The zoning still applies.
Right.
The zoning still applies.
That clarifies.
So switching gears a little bit, Craig, I was wondering if you might offer any insight on the utility situation, capacity, and getting everything across the highway. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, so the project will require sanitary sewer and water to be extended south of Highway 40. We've been working with the applicant's engineer on the designs for both of those, and it can be done. Clearly, it's going to require permission from MDT, but the solution to manage the sanitary sewer actually is, I think, going to help the city out considerably and allow us to take gravity sewer much further south on Highway 93. So capacity is there at the wastewater treatment plant. We have adequate water supply. This building will be fire suppressed, and so I don't have concerns about water supply either. Of course, when we do the tank on the south end of town, it will improve water pressure out there, but as it's currently designed, we should be fine.
And will it all be sized to allow for future growth down south of this intersection?
Yeah, the city will likely participate in some oversizing of some of the utilities to make sure that we can expand to the south.
And with respect to traffic, which was a concern brought up by a number of letters, would you offer any commentary on particularly the Emerald Drive situation and how you feel about that?
Well, you know, the project is going to require a full-blown traffic impact study, and we'll be reviewing that when it comes in. MDT will also have to go through that, and we may want to consider hiring a third-party engineer to review that. But at this point, I think there's adequate provisions for traffic based on what they're showing on the south and then the circulation through Emerald Drive.
Is it customary that we would not have a full traffic study at this junction?
Yeah, I would think that it is. I mean, right now, we're not approving a specific project.
But we are.
But it's
right?
annexation and rezone is what you're approving tonight. At the building permit stage, we'll be looking at the TIS.
Okay. Okay, that's all for me, thanks.
Steve?
Thanks.
That was a nice segue into my question is I'm just confused about what legal weight we have to enforce this development agreement. Maybe that's for Angie, I'm not sure.
I'd say.
I mean, it's an agreement. It's a contract. You know, and then written in our remedies in there too, is if they're not complying with the development agreement, we can hold building permits. We can sue them. I know that's a bulky process, and I think that was raised by citizens, but that is a legal process to enforce an agreement. You know, again, I think it's kind of a catch-22 because, you know, you folks want to see what you're approving for annexation, and I completely agree with that. But if we get this as a very conceptual design, and they're going to comply with the conceptual design, but if we get too far in the weeds at this point, we're not really, like Wendy said, approving a specific development. So we do have ways to enforce it. It's an enforceable agreement. It will cloud title. It will run with the land. So we do, and again, we can hold building permits, which sometimes tends to get people's attention rather quickly.
I guess my question then is, so imagine this traffic study comes in and it becomes no longer financially possible to do this kind of development there, then what happens with that property? And what happens with the developer? I just don't quite understand.
Well, I think the developer would have to come, and again, these are kind of new, Steve. Again, they're not required by state law. We don't require them as part of an ordinance. We just had a developer that was, I think, really willing to work with the city and try to design a project that would be approved, and that would make sense as far as annexation goes. If it doesn't pencil out, they're going to have to come back to the city, and maybe they scrap the whole thing. That's kind of up to them at that point.
But then they're already annexed into the city, correct?
They are annexed into the city. They can.
Zoned.
Yep, they're annexed and zoned. They could petition for de-annexation if they so chose. That's an available under Montana law, and I think we've done that maybe on one occasion before. It was certainly not a development of this size. I think it was just one property, but they could always petition for de-annexation if it doesn't pencil.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, did you have anything? Andy? Thanks, Wendy, for your staff report. We did advertise for a public hearing on Resolution 23-32, and we'll hold that public hearing now. We do have your written testimony, your letters, your emails in our packet. They're all part of the public record, so please don't read what you've already submitted to the council. For time's sake, I would like to limit public comment to 3 minutes per speaker, and I'll open up the public hearing now. Who would like to begin? If you did sign up, I don't need to call your name, just help yourselves to the microphone, and if you could line up against the glass doors to try to help expedite the public hearing, that would be certainly appreciated.
Hello, John. We put together a presentation for the annexation. It's going to be like 15 to 20 minutes long with a little movie. Can we present that
Of course.
first?
If I neglected to indicate that, I apologize.
Okay,
We
thank you.
do invite the applicant's representatives first during our public hearings to present any additional information. So we'll hear from the applicants at this point before taking formal public hearing comments.
Good evening. My name is Alberto Valner, and I'm here to make a brief introduction of our project and our consultants who will provide a more detailed presentation. Over 8 years ago, I started visiting and spending a considerable amount of time in Whitefish. Then about 5 years ago, I bought a home here where my wife and I now spend most of every year. During this time, I have seen, just like you all have, how members of our community and workforce have been slowly pushed out due to a lack of attainable and affordable housing. There's no question that housing today is the major issue affecting the fabric of our community. Alpine 9340 is a project about housing. It is not the solution, for the problem is too big to be resolved by one project and or by one solution, but it is one of the many tools that will help alleviate the housing issue. To arrive at what we are proposing today, over the past year, we have met with many members of the community, businesses, the hospital, Big Mountain, the Emerald Homeowners Association, as well as on multiple occasions with city staff to share our ideas and get their input. We have also met on multiple occasions with the Montana Department of Transportation to ensure safe egress and ingress, as well as to get their support for a series of proposed crosswalk improvements that we will make to the 93 and 40 intersections. No site is perfect, but we were attracted to this location because it has all the infrastructure and services that a project like this needs. Prior proposals for this location have considered many options, including most recently a major retail development, but we were fully aware that the city did not want to see this or any other gas station or another storage facility, which we can do by right. To us, housing with a small neighborhood retail component was the obvious answer. It is about providing housing to the people that work in our community, such as waiters, nurses, firemen, retail stores, and office personnel. Young adults who graduate high school and want to stay to work and live here, and likewise college graduates that want to come back and live in their community. We do not want to see our community turned into another Jackson Hole or Park City, where people need to drive 30 to 35 minutes to Kalispell or 15 to 20 minutes to Columbia Falls for their housing. These are not condos, nightly rentals, or luxury apartments, but instead these are meant to be attainable and affordable units for our community workforce. It is about providing housing units that will allow our low and moderate income community to remain here in Whitefish, housing that is essential to keep our city vibrant and livable, in addition to addressing the widespread labor shortage that we have seen in the last few years. We will not pay a fee in lieu. Instead, 10% of our units will be deed restricted to be affordable under the Legacy Housing Program. The project is being submitted for annexation to the city under the annexation procedures that this city council has previously established. The property will also receive a WBT zoning, as it has been previously stipulated by this council for properties being annexed in the Highway 93 corridor. The WBT zoning is consistent with the Highway Transitional Future Land Use and therefore complies with the 2021 Whitefish Highway 93 corridor plan. In essence, we are complying with everything that has been established for properties like this by this council. In addition, even though not a requirement, we have agreed to sign a development agreement that, as Mr. Sweeney mentioned, runs with the land and that will provide all assurances that the property can only be developed with the specified uses as stipulated in this application. We meet all setback, mass, and height requirements, other than those provided under the Legacy Housing Program, We are asking for absolutely no variances and absolutely no modifications. We are required to provide 20% open space, but we're actually providing 40%. The parking requirement is 1 per unit, but we're actually providing closer to 1.5. Besides the project providing a dog park and playground, it is providing a series of community benefits, such as bike and pedestrian paths along the full length of the 93 and 40, a proposed bus and mountain climber bus stop, as well as 21 affordable units. Lastly, this is the main entrance into our community, and to be honest, it deserves better than what is there now at any of its existing corners or another storage facility. As you will see in our presentation, we're trying to create a landmark gateway into our community that we can all be proud of. We have hired only local consultants, and our intent moving forward will be to do the same. With that in mind, let me introduce you to our project architect, David Coyle from Cushing Terrell, and our civil engineer, Brandon Theus from Robert Page and Associates, to provide you a more detailed presentation to the project.
Thank you, Alberto.
Hello, I'm David Cool at Cushing Terrell.
How you doing, David?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to walk through the concept of the project, and so hopefully, Michelle, is this my signal to you to advance? Next, let's use next. Okay, awesome. This is the site, in case you're not familiar with it. It's at the corner of 93 and 40. Some fun facts there, roughly 10 acres. It's the orange star there. It's on the southern border of the city, basically unannexed, of course. Notable transportation junction. Oh, thank you. Might need that. I best not do this. I might shoot you in the eyes, John. I don't want to do that. It's probably better if I stay away from that. That'll be offensive. So what we like about the site, it is it's a transportation junction. It is a good spot, I think, for some density because of the ability and immediacy to get to and from other parts of the valley quickly without having to kind of go through town. We know traffic through town is getting more and more difficult. So the ease of access, I think, is important. And it's also, as Alberto mentioned, a great gateway to Whitefish. And so you can move to the next one. Try to go through some of this quickly. As architects, we like to look at the context of the site in order to inform what the design could be. So you can hop to the next one. This is some photography. This is an aerial, of course, from above. Some of the things we notice, of course, there's great views to the mountains and from many locations on the site. Our neighbors are the town pump and some other businesses around it, and then, of course, the wonderful Emerald Heights to the east, which is separated a bit by some thick forest there. You can hop to the next one. It's a view from 93 headed north. What's notable, this is really as you crest the hill and you drop down into, to me, this is like, when you come over that hill, this is basically how you drop into the entrance, I think, to Whitefish. This feels like the entrance to Whitefish to me. Notably, Emerald Heights, which drops down to the right there, and it drops what, a good, 30 feet, 30-ish? I look at the civil, he should know, right? About 30 feet, and that's something we want to take advantage of in the design, and you'll see how we did that. Also notable in this photo is the image of the forest there on the corner of our site. We want to maintain as much vegetation as we can. It's great. It's mature. We want to keep it. So just so you know, you can jump ahead. Yep, this is a little bit further north. So about halfway, and at this point the site begins to level off. We're probably still 10 or 12 feet above the level of the site here. And again, we want to take advantage of that drop in elevation with the design of the project, and I'll show you how we did that. We're kind of coming into view now to Whitefish Marine, and then you can go to the next one. This is at the corner, and interestingly, I think we know this, the site begins to really open up to the east. The views to the east open up, and architecturally we can do this a couple of different ways. You can try to square the building up to that corner and kind of crowd the corner, or you can give it some relief and allow that openness, that view, essentially the view shed to the east, to exist. That's what we want to do with this architecture. We want to pull it away, provide relief, provide a bit of a gathering spot there, and I'll show you how we do that as well. Next slide, please. There's some neighbors, Whitefish Marine here. These guys are in the county, of course, so they don't have the landscape corridor requirements on them, but the next slide shows Town Pump, of course, our neighbor to the north, who is compliant with the corridor plan at this point. You can see a lot more landscape and sidewalks. Of course, we're going to be on that side of the fence, if you will, in terms of landscape. The last slide in context really quickly is this one. Thank you. basically the view to the west on 40. This really just kind of confirms the amount of vegetation up against Emerald, which I think we're glad it's there. It's a wonderful amenity for the neighborhood. Okay, next slide. This is where things get interesting, I hope. We're going to attempt this. This is a little movie file. You can press play if you want to. Crafting the design. I wanted to walk you through kind of how we came about the project design through a series of, well, it's actually a movie file. Let's see how this goes. Okay, these are our setbacks. The space in between is our buildable zone, 50 feet on the highways and 30 feet on the other two sides. This is where we are allowed to construct within those constraints. We've also got connections shown here. This is the highways, and normally, what we really want to do, I think, ideally, is plug in toward, I would call it the back of the site on the east. That's furthest from the highway. If we do parking simply back there, buildings toward the front, that gives us as much buffer as we can from buildings to Emerald, which I think is important. As architects, we love to look at where views are because we want the architecture to take advantage of that. And so this is a diagram showing views primarily toward the mountain and the Whitefish Range. There's good views everywhere, but these are the ones that were primary to consider. We also look at sunlight. And we studied this. We want to collect the sun if we can in the winter. We want to shade from it in the summertime. And so we'll show you kind of how we're working that with the architecture as well. I think one more piece here is natural amenities. Again, we got a lot of trees. We like to keep as many as we can. And that green belt there with the setback all the way to the highway pavement is about 100 feet or more. We want to maintain that essentially as a front yard, and we'll show you how we want to do that too. And I guess last, the recognition that at the intersection is really, it's a junction. It is a focal point. It is a gateway. It has an opportunity. So what can we do with architecture to create that? That's our goal. So those are some initial goals. I think coming up is, now I'm going to show you a bunch of options. We studied a whole bunch of different ways to lay this. I'm just going to show you all of them, everywhere from buy rights, storage, all the way up to mixed use and a little commercial. So we started with what happens with the absolute minimum, and you can put a whole lot of storage on here. We had a couple different options here. I'm not going to talk much about this because I don't think anybody wants this, but we were asked to study it. I think we set this aside because we all agree that the highest and best use is better than this. There's option B, in case option A wasn't enough for you. But next we studied multifamily in a bunch of different ways. And very, very simply, you can plug in 24 plexes and it looks like this. And if you spread them around the site, we just didn't like it, not very inventive. It puts a lot of density up against Emerald, which I don't think anybody liked. Puts the core of just parking. It was an uninventive solution. So we studied one where we pulled it all to 93, but we didn't really like this either because it created this wall of 3-story architecture, density, almost like we were turning our back on the community. We didn't like that. So we looked at one where we kind of fell right in the middle, and that kind of is the next one. We pushed the architecture more toward the center. The highest points of these buildings are the core down the middle. Those are 3 stories, and we'll step down to 2 and then down to the highway. And then you can see the commercial and courtyard up on the corner as that icon. And then the buildings reach out with their arms essentially to kind of gravitate toward the green space we were calling the front yard. These are a little bit smaller buildings, a little more diverse, the permeability, openness, a little more breathing room with them. And then if we add the walkway, that becomes essentially our front yard. The goal here is for that to become the amenity that we all share. It becomes the front as opposed to the back of these buildings. And we want to try to tie our front doors of our buildings actually directly into that. And hopefully this will pop in. There we go. People should be able to come downstairs, walk right out to this courtyard, and then right to the front yard, if you will. They can also essentially go out back stairs to the parking as well if we need to. But then we started studying this in 3D, and that's what the next one is, playing out as 3-story masses at the middle of the site, not at the end, and we drop down to 2, and then we address essentially the public way with that scale. It's a much more human scale, a lot easier to sort of look at this because it softens the view of it as it pushes the massing to the back. Those 2-story spaces become potentially, we want to make those as roof gardens and roof terraces that take advantage of the views we were talking about earlier. So that's our goal there, is to make it a real amenity that can be shared and used just by virtue of the massing. Then we studied forms and materials and things like this, just to kind of play around with the forms so that we can come up with something interesting. I think it should go to a three-dimensional representation here. Come on, there we go. So this is a little preview. I'm going to show you more images here shortly, but this is where it steps down from a 2 to 3 story. You can see the roof terraces up there, but also just a whole lot. We want to take that forest on the south that's there and push it up through and let the trail wind through that. That's going to become a screening device in both directions so that it kind of provides filtered views toward the architecture, but also blocks and provides shade for the occupants the other way around. This is the corner icon with the courtyard. I'm going to show you more images of this shortly. I just wanted to go through a couple more slides and then let Brandon talk about engineering. Can you jump to the next one? I think we have some facts and figures here. There we go. Okay, take a deep breath. I'm going to try to read through this quickly, although a lot of this was covered in between the earlier speakers here. About 10 acres, about 4 of it is open, 40%, which is double what the PUD requirement for legacy would require. Most of that you're seeing in the form of the front yard we described earlier, just a lot of green space that we want to take advantage of. We talked about zoning. We were proposing WBT now, as we mentioned. Density, we are looking at 210 units that are rentals of that 10%. Due to legacy would be 21 units for affordable, 189 market rate. All of this is currently being diagrammed as 1 and 2 bedroom units. I know there was concerns about, is it 4 bedrooms, can people be, no, it's 1 and 2s. That's all we're showing right now. Maximum, I think average square footage 950, I think right now is what we're looking at. Yes, we are looking at about 15,000 square foot of commercial in the corner. That is yet to be determined what exactly it is. We talked about setbacks there. Our buildings are about 15,000 square foot each right now as being shown. Let me see what else we have here. 40-foot max building height, but I want to say that as you saw, a lot of the, in fact, the corner building is only 2 stories, and then the other buildings step down to 2, so we only probably touch 40 if we start playing with our masses, which we really haven't completely studied. But so the building does not max out at 40 feet. 304 parking spaces, we talked about that ratio. It's about 1.5 almost per unit, as opposed to the 1 that's required. We are talked about city water and sewer. We do have amenities, bike paths, we mentioned that. The highway corridor frontage, we're going to be compliant with that. We are thinking about dog parks, playgrounds, and certainly the improved pedestrian crossing, which we've been discussing already with DOT. Brandon's probably going to talk more about that in a minute, but let's see. Access roads and traffic, the last item there, full movement intersection, we mentioned that earlier. Brandon will talk more about that. Right-ins and right-outs. We have coordinated with MDOT already about crossway improvements. We'll get more into that detail. Snow bus, mountain climber bus stop, and then we actually have, Brandon probably talk more about it, but a traffic study has already been completed. States that we have already, let's see if I read this, that the current road capacity would accommodate about 400 actually. We're only proposing 200. So it seems like we're doing okay in terms of traffic by this study. You can jump to the next slide. I'll try to go through this quick and then let Brandon talk about the engineering. This is a site layout. Going from left to right, you see that L-shaped building on the left. That's the commercial under 15,000 and then 15 above of apartments. It's a 2-story structure. You see the corner courtyard with an icon there. That's our gateway element, a clock tower or something like that. The rest of the buildings as we move to the, I guess, to the south, they vary a little bit in their design. That's intentional. We don't want a completely duplicative design, but you see how they sort of start with their density of 3 stories in the middle, and they start to step down to 2 stories and create roof gardens and things. And those arms that reach out actually create really awesome, I think, opportunities for courtyards in those spaces that is literally an extension of the green space coming off of the trail. You can see the dog parks and other things in that design, and then a great deal of landscape intended to stretch north from the forest that's in the bottom corner. I guess east of all this, parking, you can see the snow bus stop in the corner up by, I guess, Highway 40. And then we're proposing primarily covered parking, which is another amenity for the occupants, and it's also kind of a way to, I think, diminish the appearance of the parking lot. As we hit the setback, essentially at 30 feet along Emerald, discussions have been made. Clients interested in talking to Emerald about what that barrier should be. Is it a fence? Is it a wall? Whatever it is, definitely interested in collaborating with that group, the folks in Emerald, about what that barrier is. In my mind, it's something that will, in fact, stop folks from wandering through there. It's something that stops headlights. It's something that reflects sound back. And we do have some, the grade's going to come down there anyway, so there'll be some retaining back there, I'm sure, as well. So all of those things should contribute to maintaining, I would say, some privacy for the folks in Emerald to the east there. I miss anything? Okay, I just want to make sure. I can go to the next slide, I guess. Angel, this is Brandon.
Thanks, David.
Councilors, Mayor, thanks for having us tonight. Next slide, please. My name is Brandon Tice, by the way, with RPA Engineering. So this is the plan we've pulled together, and this is more of an engineering schematic. First thing I want to mention, we've mentioned it several times, is the landscaping buffers around the site. Along Highway 40 and 93, we're required to have 50 foot for a landscape buffer, but the highway's actually, another 40 to 50 feet away from the property line. So there's a nice, massive green belt that would go around this site, as much as 100 feet in some areas, that we'll be able to utilize to put in a really nice shared use path along the west side of the property and along the north side of the property. There's quite a few trees on this property. There's kind of two main pockets. The one is along the east side up against Emerald Heights, and a lot of those trees fall in that 30-foot residential landscape buffer there. So we would like to try and keep as many of those trees as possible. They're mature. There's also the pocket of trees that is along the Highway 93 corridor on the south end of the project. Some of those trees are, near the buildings or around the building footprints, but the majority of them are out in that green space area. And we're hoping to take the path and kind of wind it through some of those trees and protect those and try and keep some separation and some screening between the highway and the residents that would be living in those buildings actually below the grade of the highway. As mentioned, the open space on this site is about 40%. So we start out with 10 acres. There's two pieces here. There's the 10-acre piece, and then there's a smaller triangular piece south of Emerald Drive. But the piece that's north, the larger 10-acre piece, when we apply those buffers, we end up with about 6 acres of usable space. So the other 4 acres is this donut that goes around the property, ends up about 40% open space, which is about double what we would be required to provide with the PUD with the legacy component. Access to this site, we have 2 ways to get in and out of the site. Along the north side of the site, we'd be coming off of Highway 40, and that's going to be a right in and right out. So we've been working with MDT on this. They're comfortable with that. The TIS, we have a draft TIS that we've pulled together for the 210 units. We have shared that with MDT, and they are on board with that. They agree that that is the correct approach for the north side of this site. On the south side, we have access to Emerald Drive, and then folks would come out of Emerald Drive and access the highway at that point. I talked with our traffic engineer this morning, and he recommends that we have the lane, as you're coming out of Emerald towards Highway 93, that is a right lane and a left lane. So we have 2 lanes there. Is one of the things that we're considering at that location. Emerald Drive would also be upgraded to city standards, so we would get the full curb and gutter in there with a sidewalk on the north side, street lights, the street boulevard trees, and we would bring the path that comes in from the north up to that intersection and have a crosswalk to keep you going to the south as you continue to go that direction. Parking is a lot of it's going to be covered. So you can see on this exhibit here, there's quite a bit of it that has like a red hatching on it. We're proposing to do some parking, some covered parking. We're also considering possibly putting some solar panels on some of these covered parking areas to help out with generation of power. I guess it'd be the lower or the western lane there is going to be a fire lane, so it's 26 foot wide, which is wider than what we would typically do in a parking lot, but that's been worked through with the fire department to make sure that we have good access for the fire trucks to come in here to fight a fire. We're exceeding the requirements of the parking. As David mentioned in the previous slide, we're about 1.45, 1.5 stalls per unit, which is above the 1.0 requirement. So we've got plenty of parking here as well. Stormwater, stormwater is always the hardest thing. Where does the water go? how do we treat the water, how do we store the water. So as we develop this site, we're going to be generating more stormwater than what was historically generated on this site. Just to give you a little bit of background, the water actually flows from the south to the north through this site. And when you stand out there, it doesn't look like that, but it goes to the north and it ends up hitting a concrete culvert that then wraps around the Highway 93 frontage and then turns and goes east along Highway 40 and discharges to the MDT ditch at the northeastern corner of the site. We're planning to utilize that same storm main. It's in good shape. And before we release the stormwater to that existing main, we're going to send the water to the south triangle piece, store it, treat it, and then flow control it out that system so that we're maintaining the historical rate of flow and the traditional flow of water through our site from south to north. Water, as Craig mentioned earlier, will extend that from the corner of Highway 93 and 40 near Town Pump. There's a 12-inch main there right now. We will directional drill that water underneath the highway to get to our corner, and then we'll open dig a new water main all the way around our site and bring it out to the intersection of Emerald and Highway 93 for future extension if needed. Next slide, please. Next slide is kind of, for me, kind of an exciting one because it's, I don't know, I'm a geek. But we found a way to get gravity sewer to this site. For a long time, we were thinking that we were going to have an expensive lift station that would have a lot of maintenance for years and years into the future that the city would potentially be maintaining. We were able to figure out a way to get gravity sewer to this site. And at the upper right-hand corner, you can see where it says City Soccer Fields. There's an existing manhole at that location. And what we're proposing to do is a bore and jack underneath the highway. It's where you push like a 24-inch casing underneath the highway, auger it in, push the casing with the auger. Then you can put your sewer pipe in that. And then we'll be able to bring that gravity main up to our site, bring the gravity main through our site, and terminate it at the same location that we're terminating the water. The water and the sewer, those trenchless technologies will not impede the traffic on Highway 40. So we can do all this work out of sight, out of mind, keep the traffic flowing, and that's really good. So that's the nuts and bolts of the engineering. Yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of the engineering on this project. I want to say thanks to the Public Works staff because they've been great just working with us, trying to figure out all the ins and outs of what we can and cannot do and what works for them as well. So we've been trying to keep that in mind as we've been developing this. Thank you.
Before you leave the podium there, Brandon, any questions for Brandon or Eric or Alberto for that matter, or David? Steve?
So it looks like you're going to pump the stormwater up to the south end of the property to let it then drain back to the north end?
It's actually all going to gravity flow.
Really?
So that existing concrete pipe was placed about 15 years ago. That's my understanding, when they placed a bunch of fill in there. So that ground used to all flow to the north at one point in time, but they brought fill in and it kind of backed the water up, so they put a pipe in to get it around. So our water from our site is largely going to flow to the south, to the pond, get treated and flow controlled, and then it will get conveyed by that existing pipe back to the north, and it'll all be done by gravity flow.
Okay, but isn't the northern end of the property lower than the southern end?
It kind of has a crown in it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And that crown was created by that fill that they brought in years ago. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Further questions? We'll start with Rebecca, then Ben.
Yeah, Brandon, could you talk about the crosswalk improvements that you spoke to
good point.
with MDT? Because that's kind of a big concern.
It is, and I'm sorry, I glossed over that. So we've met with MDT 2 different times. The first time we met with them, we had about 8 or 9 different options of ways to improve that intersection. They even included things like center medians and pork chops, we call them, where you could have like a pedestrian refuge island, all the way down to just improving the crosswalk markings themselves with better paint. We then had a second meeting after we went through a bunch of those options, and we landed on several. One is, looking at like a colored concrete, looking at piano key improvement markings that you typically see around schools. But the big one that we landed on was improving the push button controls so that you get the newer beacons in there that have the countdown timers, so you know how much time you have to go across, and then also potentially adding some lighting to the intersection because it is somewhat dark in that area at times. So we've been working with MDT on all those options, and we had some really good feedback from them on the last time we met about 3 weeks ago.
Ben?
So you said the stormwater discharges in the ditch on the north end of the property?
Yeah, northeast corner, yep.
Where does it go after that?
It continues to go to the east. I believe it crosses the approach into Emerald, and then it crosses again a highway and makes its way towards the river.
Gotcha. And MDT is okay with that setup? Okay.
Yeah, as long as we're not sending it any more flow than we were historically, then they'll be okay with it.
Okay.
Yep.
And there were a number of comments received pertaining to stormwater impacts to the residents of Emerald Heights. What would you say would be the impact to that neighborhood as it relates to stormwater?
Yeah, we're actually, so there's a little bit of this side along the east side actually flows onto Emerald Heights. It would just be some sheetland flow that goes through the forest. When we develop this site, we actually have more of the water coming onto our site, so we're going to be making the basin on our site a little bit bigger. Any of the existing stormwater on their site that flows to that existing basin around the Emerald Drive area where our detention pond is actually going to be picked up by our storm drain system and routed through our pond. And right now it's kind of a forested area, kind of it doesn't flow the water maybe as efficiently as it will when we're done with it, because we'll actually have more pipes and we'll clean up the landscape so that the water can get out of there more readily.
Further questions? Rebecca?
Who owns the road that you're going to improve, the Emerald Street, is that?
It's a county right-of-way right now.
Okay, so do you have to work with the county to get permission to improve that road?
It's my understanding that if this project is annexed, that piece will become city right-of-way.
City? Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Any other questions from the council? Anything further?
He's been hogging the mic. We have a few images to show you at the end here, so that's okay. Good job, man. It's all right.
Thanks, man.
And only Brandon would geek out about sewer diagrams. That's all I can tell you. Only guy I know. Yep, we can walk through these quickly too. We wanted to close with some images and renderings that were a little more fully rendered. Just a view from 93 and 40. This is the clock tower. Concept is the gateway and the courtyard. Think of it as a Bias Brewing type of a gathering space, and the two-story commercial and residential above it. You can go to the next one, a little closer in. Alberta wanted to put skis on the clock tower. Those are vocals, just so you know. You can go to the next one. Gathering space there, just showing a nice place for people to hang out, completely open to the public, hoping that we get as many guests as we can there. Materially, we'll definitely be complying with the architectural review standards, so we've just kind of gone on the road of concept here, but wood, stone, metal, glass, things like that. So next one, just a distance view as you're kind of coming from the south of the gateway. Next one. A little dark here, but you can see this is toward the east side of the building. That would be the drop-off and pickup for the snow bus and mountain climber covered area right next to the commercial space, and sort of an access then to the parking behind it. Next one. So this is elevated. We can actually go to the next one, the drop zone. This is coming, there's a before and hopefully after shot there that you can see. This is where the grade of the site actually works to our benefit. If it's a good 30 feet lower there down that slope and we can maintain the screening, you're actually looking into the third floor, if not above, to a certain degree, these buildings, because there are 2 to 3 floors. So that's a good thing when it comes to the visibility of the site as you approach it from the south. You can go to the next one. I think that's about halfway up. This is where the landscaping starts to provide this filtered effect, if you will, to and from the buildings. You can see the 2 to 3 story staggered structures and the gateway in the distance there. And I think maybe 1 or 2 more here. A little closer in. This is, again, we see the pulling the buildings away as opposed to scoring up on the corner to allow this sort of carve away the corner and the views to the east as you can kind of turn the corner onto 40 there. Okay, next one. There's some amenities. This is a play area right along the trail that could be open to the general public and occupants both. A couple more here. A dog park, also open to dogs of the world, I guess. Next one. This is just a tight-in shot of the courtyards. You know, these are going to be great little places, I think, sheltered from wind and sun, and a great gathering. Amenities that exist as a result of creating, you know, U-shaped architecture, I guess, that faces the courtyards, that faces the green space. This is, you know, and fire pits and things to be used in different seasons. And I think one more shot at about Christmas time. Speaking of fire pits, there's no reason why these amenities can't be used, you know, year-round with, you know, proper fire pits and things. And so that'd be a lot of fun to do that. I think the last slide is it. You know, in closing, we're looking to provide, if we best we can, you know, housing. I think needed housing for the community in a respectful, I think, honorable way that hopefully you know, provides a gateway to the city. And so appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the development team's presentation. At this point, we will open it up for public comment. As I mentioned earlier, we do have your written testimony, letters, emails in our packets. They're part of the public record, so please try and not repeat what you've already submitted. And if you don't mind limiting your comments to 3 minutes, I would certainly appreciate it. Thank you. Who's first?
I'll be quick, and I haven't sent anything in previously.
Quite all right.
Ann Jeremiahson, and I live on River Lakes Drive near the hospital in Whitefish. And I strongly oppose the proposed annexation and development of so many units at the corner of 93 and 40. Increased traffic is a strong, strong concern. I go through that intersection once a day or more, and it's a very scary place. It's already difficult and dangerous with many drivers going through yellow and red signals. Also, Emerald Heights and Hospital Way, both dead end onto Highway 40. Left and right turns are both very scary and dangerous, and people just whiz through there no matter what. So traffic already comes from the hospital, the soccer playfields, as well as residential neighborhoods. Please don't accept this annexation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Daniel.
Councilors, Mayor, Daniel Sitter with Housing Whitefish. As you know, we're all about finding housing solutions to help our hardworking neighbors afford to live in our community. When we look at proposed projects, we look at overall community benefit, relationship to our mission, and the responsible land use. While we would prefer to see higher density closer to town, we know that's not always feasible. This project does offer the 10% of the deed-restricted affordable units, and will also add an important supply of multifamily units for our community. We definitely acknowledge the concerns to the traffic and location, and those are real. And we also trust that the development team, the city, the Montana Department of Transportation can really work collaboratively on those issues. So at the end of the day, for us, this project is in the projected growth and corridor plan, which the council has adopted, and they're not asking for any variances. And again, this project's always going to welcome a lot of cause for concern and a lot of public comment. For us, this meets those criteria that we're looking at.
Thanks, Daniel.
Good evening, councilors. David Randall here at 215 Emerald Drive. I did submit a written comment, so I'll avoid overlapping on my previously provided comments. I'd like to focus right now on this development agreement. Seems like there's some confusion tonight over what exactly it is, when it needs to be signed, how it needs to be signed. One thing we're certain of, though, is that it needs to be signed in conjunction with the annexation and the zone change. It provides a vital tool for City Council to actually know what they're agreeing to and know what kind of development will go in. Another thing we know about this agreement is that it is a separate and distinct act by the council. And looking to the agenda for tonight, we only see that the resolution for annexation and the zone change has been agendized. The public has been not provided with the right to know that this agreement is up for debate and up for signature tonight. So I don't believe the City Council can actually hear and decide that tonight. And so I would end in asking City Council to either completely deny or actually postpone all of the resolutions tonight. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Mr. Mayor and City Council members, Garth Wells, 5960 US Highway 93 South. I just wanted to start today with a sense of scale. For example, my building at Whitefish Marine is 9,750 square feet. I think we all would agree it's very big. It is only 22 feet high. So if you're looking at a 30,000 square foot mixed residential and commercial building, it's going to be very, very large. And just to give you a sense of all the, I think, 4 or 5, 15,000 square foot buildings. So I would like to say that I think that's something that should go into your consideration against allowing this annexation and against allowing this development. The other thing I think that's an important thing to bring up is that with this new state statute, anybody could build a 15,000 square foot retail location without your oversight, provided it meant the conditional use of the new zoning that you proposed, if they did apartments on top. So it would, I actually think, if you look at this development, it can't go there without city water and sewer. I think that's the reason for it. And you know, if you look at the zoning already, I think you're going to encourage more growth and bigger developments by actually continuing to further annex to the south. My number one concern, of course, outside of those issues would be safety for traffic. I think that's a very congested corridor. People come very fast down that hill, down Highway 40, or excuse me, down Highway 93, approaching 40. That's a very fast and rapid transition there, and I do think that would be a concern. The other thing I would like to bring up is I do think that adding that much retail could possibly impact some of the existing businesses on Central Avenue. And for example, my business, Whitefish Marine, was already in the city limits, and we only moved to that location simply because we outgrew our old location. And that's the only comments I have.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Jerry LaPrath. I live at 195 Sapphire Court, and until the good citizens of the Emerald Heights HOA come to their senses, I'm also the president of the HOA. Feels a bit like the cart got ahead of the horse here to me. We're noting too many deficiencies in the proposals that need addressing to warrant consideration prior to some remedies. I've seen no MDT traffic study. I've just now heard that there's been some studies, but I've not seen one. But if you throw in 210 units here at build out, you'll be adding possibly 800 to 1,000 entries and exits to 93 and 40 a day. It's pretty significant. I feel the safety of all drivers will be compromised if speed limits are not addressed with reductions, and I fear that collisions and injuries will increase absent a traffic light or a double lane roundabout or some function similar at the intersection of 93 and Emerald. It's hard to turn left now out of there, and during commute times I suspect it'll be impossible when build out's complete. These concerns need to be addressed and made part of the contracts and the agreements prior to approving the request, I feel. There will be an impact certainly to our Emerald Heights HOA's roads. The county pays nothing to maintain those roads. We bear the entire burden, and the contracts and agreements need to address this prior to your consideration or possible approval. Absent a solution to this, we will be made to pay for additional maintenance, etc. Specific barrier or fence between a new development and existing subdivision needs to be agreed on and entered into the agreements. again, if we don't have it in writing, what do we really know is going to happen? A solid barrier between the properties is essential to reduce noise, the possibility of trespass, and to ensure against conflict. The density requested seems excessive. Everybody knows we need additional units to live in. But this is a lot of units, and it seems a bit much for the space available. Others have addressed the stormwater concerns. Again, if there's something in writing about it and how it's going to be done, it'd be nice to have something to fall back on. I feel to comply with the growth policy and the zoning regulations, that these deficiencies need to be addressed, and the solutions entered into the proper agreements prior to your approval or consideration. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Jerry.
Hi, Kevin Abel, 120 Waverly Place, also President Logan Health Whitefish. Workforce housing continues to be one of our main concerns, and hiring has been very challenging these last couple of years, and we see this as a potential solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, John.
How you doing, Alan?
Good. I'm Alan Wolf. I'm a 37-year resident of Emerald Heights. Somehow managed to not be the president.
And he used to be my boss at the DNRC.
Yeah. My comments have to do with Emerald Drive approach, and it's a poor choice for the main entry to the proposed project. And I have a number of reasons why. Just a little bit of engineering. Beginning at the shoulder edge of Highway 93 going down Emerald Heights, Emerald Drive, it's a 9% grade for 225 feet, then a 6% grade for another 100 feet, and then it's level. And that level is a little bit higher than the current level of the property. So that equates to, and it was pointed out as an advantage earlier, a 30-foot drop from Highway 93 down to the level of the property. There's no flat landing on Highway 93. It comes right up to the shoulder of the road, and then you're on the highway. The grade on Highway 93 passing Emerald Drive is about 4.5%, and it levels out near the existing approach to the property that's in question here. The northbound speed limit is 65 miles an hour until about the beginning of the right turn lane to Highway 40, which is just about where you can stomp on the brakes if you don't go flying through the intersection on a red light, which people do all the time. The issues, as population has increased, Emerald Drive has become a difficult and dangerous access to 93. New traffic is sure to back up on the steep grade. It's common now to wait 1 to 3 minutes for a safe left turn onto Highway 93 with the minimum traffic that we have now. Drivers on 93 going north frequently dart over from the left-hand lane into the right turn lane and go around the Highway 40 turn on two wheels. I've had a couple of interactions there that because of that. That makes right turns tricky as well. A rough estimate based on 200 plus apartments means the development could see 400 to 500 vehicle trips a day on Emerald Drive. That's a 10-fold increase over what the traffic is there now. Emerald Drive is snowy and icy all winter long for 6 months. Even with frequent snow plowing, Emerald Heights plows right after most storms and sands the hill. Based on 37 years use and observation, it's difficult or impossible to start uphill without four-wheel drive. Sometimes tricky even with four-wheel drive. Slide-ins and back-downs are common. It's best to keep up your momentum from the bottom of the steep hill to make it to the stop sign when you come out of Emerald Heights. Traffic turning from this proposed development won't have that opportunity to make that transition up the hill or get any momentum to get up there. That's really not compatible with the new traffic volume. Part of Emerald Drive is assumed by the city. The provisions have to be made for aggressive winter maintenance. And since this is a side street and isolated from other Whitefish City streets, it's kind of a problem child that way. Montana Highway Department's daily snow plowing splash on the shoulder of the road makes starting on the highway from Emerald Drive in the winter even more difficult and dangerous. Snow piles from clearing the junction limit sight distance up and down 93. And they're coming down the hill at 65 miles an hour. Also, the Montana Department of Transportation plowing route from their station near Whitefish Stage on Highway 40 leaves Highway 93. They make a little loop at the light and then they go north. So that road is not plowed until after rush hour, usually going south towards Happy Valley by the Highway Department. There's frequent slide-ins on Highway 93 in winter from people approaching downhill toward the traffic light. We've lost delineator posts every year. They've taken out the stop sign on Emerald Drive, the 45-mile-an-hour sign going down by the turn, and there's frequent wrecks around the 93 and 40 junction now. People come screaming down the hill, slam on the brakes at the light, or not. The speed limit it just has to be reduced to 45 up at the top of the hill. There needs to be a petition brought forward to do that around the Hillside Church up there or so. There's also left turning conflict on the Highway 93 center lane. Southbound traffic turning into Emerald Drive coming up from the light gets pushed into that turn lane by people trying to speed up going up the hill from the light. Coming down Highway 93, people want to turn into the Big Mountain Botanicals there, and they get pushed by cars speeding down the hill to turn left. So you end up playing chicken if you're in that turn lane and meet people, and you end up doing a little chicken dance there to get around. It's going to end up in problems one time. It's likely that new traffic will adopt Emerald Drive as an alternative access route to and from Highway 40. This will create a traffic hazard through that quiet neighborhood now. The Emerald Drive Highway 40 Hospital Way interchange, it's offset and tricky. And traffic already backs up from the traffic light to the Emerald Heights North entrance at busy times. If you're turning left into Emerald Heights from Columbia Falls, it's always dicey whether you're going to get rear-ended or sideswiped on the right when you turn in there. The recommendation from me is to redesign the project, use the existing 93 approach for the new development and avoid Emerald Drive altogether. It's nearly level. I think an alternative should at least be looked at to do something besides that would also isolate traffic that goes through Emerald Heights and avoids that approach. And I sent in comments about the water, and I talked to Brandon about that, and I've got some notes about that on here, but I won't.
Thanks, Alan.
Hi, my name's Brandon Kipner. I live at 175 Sapphire Court in Emerald Heights. I second what Jerry and Alan had to say about the safety issues going in and out of the neighborhood. That's huge. My input is not a no, but a postponement. We need to take a better look at what's going on here. We keep hearing about these MDT studies, and we weren't able to see any of this. And I really want to heighten what Alan was talking about Emerald Drive. If we're talking about an exit that comes out of the north side of that development onto 40, that's a right in and a right out only, well, then people who are coming from Columbia Falls to go to that development, they're not gonna go through that light and then turn on 93 and then hook back around. They're gonna drive right through my neighborhood on Emerald Heights, and that's a problem. And you know, once again, it doesn't have to be a no, but it needs to be, let's get these questions addressed, and let's figure out solutions to these problems before we start stamping things to go through based on some pretty pictures that may or may not happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
I'm kind of short. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can pull that down closer if you'd like.
Okay,
There you
sorry. My name is Shay LaPrath. I'm the Jerry LaPrath's daughter-in-law. Me and my husband and our son live in the neighborhood and have done so for a little over 10 years. We chose Emerald Heights because it is not in a city. We don't share a parking lot. We don't have light pollution. We are in a very spacious, beautiful neighborhood where it's safe to raise a family and that your kids can ride bikes. And you know, we chose that for a reason. And one of the things that was talked about earlier by the development team was that there is a barrier of thick trees of where the property line is now and where some of our houses are. So I don't have a pretty slideshow, but I do have a colored presentation. So I just wanted to basically demonstrate a really huge concern. So the drainage issue that runs along that property line, as well as with part of the development proposal, is removing some of those trees. And it is actually not that thick. I could see when they had walked through at one point, I could actually see them from my backyard. 10 feet from my backyard to their property line, I could see them. So eliminating those trees is not going to protect us as homeowners and them. They're gonna make that more minimal. So while that sounded great, that is not what's going to happen because they already showed that. Let me show you. Again, here's Highway 93, the proposed, and here are 6 houses, mine of which and my family are right up next to it. We are right next to it. So while this is great, yes, we're gonna have lots of housing, it's gonna be beautiful, but what about the community of people who already live here? This is not a neighborhood of VRBOs. This is not a neighborhood of people who are not here. This is families. I've lived here and we do things together. We watch out for each other. We watch each other's houses. This is a safe group of people who are being asked to be exposed to hundreds of families who are now going to be able to witness when we're home with our children, what kind of children are here. And then when they choose, like Brandon had just mentioned, if they're not going to drive all the way around, I can tell you that pre-traffic study now, they are not going to sit there and drive all the way through the intersection, all the way, and sit there and wait on Highway 93. They're going to turn left off of Highway 40, come through our neighborhood so that they can get in there. Why? Because there's nothing in there that stops them. They can flow right through. When there's accidents on this intersection, we get a taste of what that would be like every time there's an accident there, which already is often because of what all my neighbors have expressed, that this is a huge problem. We witness it all the time, and I'm going to cry because this is difficult. This is very difficult as a mother to have to think that where we chose to spend the rest of our life and forever, and a lot of my neighbors have done the same, it's very sick for me to think that that's gone. Our safety is gone. The safety of my children are gone. And again, we're part of the community too. At what point do some of us not matter? Some of the presentations sounded great, but they're not the realistic visual of what will happen. And the drainage, again, guess whose problem that is? That is the 6 houses that are within 10 feet of that property line, who are going to have lights, people walking across, all this great dog park. Where are those dogs gonna go? To the houses right next door, right? So I just want you to please consider beyond just dumping this housing and a beautiful view, and think of the community that is there and who it will impact. My husband, me, and my neighbors, there are some really great people who contribute to this community of Whitefish, and we matter too, and I really ask for you to please take everybody's consideration even my irrational mother one, taking into consideration that there are humans here who we need some protection. We need a barrier. We need a barrier between the property. I'm asking, please consider even giving us, like they had mentioned, some sort of wall, some sort of something, so that I don't have to worry about who's watching where my family is and what my family is doing. That's why we chose not to live in an apartment complex. So please take that into consideration. Before just approving this, please give us some time to, please give the development team a chance to reconsider, make some changes to this so that this works for everybody, especially the people in the Emerald Heights subdivision. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. Hey, Jen.
Hi, my name is Jen Villar, and I live in the neighborhood as well. And I think everyone in our HOA that has come to present has already talked about a lot of the main things, but and excuse me, I've been teaching all day and had open house, so I'm out of voice. My main two concerns are the safety of our residential area and the streets with what they talked about, people not wanting to go all the way around the whole neighborhood to turn left into that 93 and come through our neighborhood, which is very quiet, and our children all play there and ride bikes and go around and have lemonade stands and whatever. So that is one of the issues, is just the increased traffic flow through our neighborhood, as well as what Shay mentioned, the privacy barrier, sound barrier, and visual barrier, and security barrier between the two properties. Right now, I could take 10 to 20 steps off my backyard and be in their parking lot with nothing but some trees. So it's a concern that people could wander in there knowingly or unknowingly. The biggest concern, though, I think is, again, the traffic on 93 coming down that highway is very fast. Pulling out to go turn to Kalispell is nerve-wracking because you don't really have a sense of how fast those cars are coming downhill at highway speeds. And they often, when you pull out, you think you have enough room, and they're not braking for that light there. I mean, even this morning, I almost got rear-ended by somebody who then went on the right-hand turn lane and kind of flipped me off for pulling in front of him, although he was way up the street when I came out. My sons and I were also turning left, going up 93, turning left into Emerald Drive in the left-hand turn lane. We were stopped, and we were rear-ended by somebody going highway speed who just sort of drifted in the lanes and hit us at that speed. And that is not just us. We see it all the time. We live there. We hear it. We see it. We have the traffic diverted. It's really fast there. And there's no lights, and everyone's kind of just making a run for it to try to get across that, people go 65, 75 miles an hour there. They don't always go the speed limit. So it's very scary to think that there could be hundreds of more vehicle trips in and out of Emerald Drive. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Hello, my name is Jeff Carl. I live on 1215 Wisconsin Ave. I don't want your jobs, by the way. This is terrible. I am here to see if we can try to push something through for some sort of housing. I think there's been a lot of proposals for housing over the years. Nothing really happens or goes through. We have a lot of people that work in this town. We have a lot of businesses that are active, that need staff. And I think one of my favorite things about Whitefish is there's a sense of community. It's not to be insensitive to people that live in specific areas, especially when something is going in somewhere as a project this size. But is there ever a perfect spot? Is there ever a perfect solution? It's tough, and it's tough decisions for you folks to have to make. I just think that we ask a lot of people to come into this town and work and to provide for this community, but then we say, well, you can't really live here. So we just don't have it. And I think this is a solution that this group is trying to put together to kind of remedy that in a way. It won't fix everything, like they said, but I think it'll help a lot of us businesses and business operators to have people that work for us that are part of the community instead of most of our employees driving in from Kalispell or Columbia Falls or somewhere else. So I would like to see it pushed forward if we can, not to be insensitive to anybody else. I'm really not trying to be insensitive, but. Ed.
Behave,
I'm being
Ed.
insensitive to Ed. Don't like him. But yeah, so that's how I feel and just want to express my feelings. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hi, my name is Aaron Scott. I'm a resident of Emerald Heights, 165 Sapphire Courts. I appreciate what John was saying. I'm a small business owner here as well, so I like to see some housing. That would be great. I would, however, recommend, and the fact that there's been no traffic studies, or at least not been made public. One of the concerns that's been voiced here was that one of the 3D renderings shows a purple line going through Emerald Heights. It's almost like admitting, yeah, people are going to be cutting through there. It was one of the first ones that's there. And so taking a left, it's been mentioned before, south on 93 is nearly impossible. I have 5 teenage drivers. Thank you. Literally their most difficult maneuver is not parallel parking, it's getting out of Emerald Heights on 93. We have to teach them in the wintertime to say, okay, you have to gun it up the hill, otherwise you'll slide back down. And I've had to move their cars when they're stuck in the snow because they don't know how to drive that. Also, when you're coming in the wintertime, coming up on 40 and taking a left, which probably will happen with people, not wanting to go through the light. When you take that left into the neighborhood, there's actually a sharp turn that goes to the right. Somebody, myself, slid off the road this past winter going 5 miles an hour because of all the ice that was right there. The tow truck driver said, yeah, you're the 5th one in the last couple of days just right here. And I just think about 10 times the amount of that many people there. So definitely would like to, this, it sounds like they've spent a lot of good time at looking at stuff, but it does seem a little incomplete. Would like to see more traffic study done as well as a solution to, somebody mentioned even maybe people would enter into that apartment complex not on Emerald Heights. I don't know, there's a lot of difficult things. I don't envy your position as well, but thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Hello, Alex Kulian, 465 Armory Road. As a full-time resident of Whitefish and someone that's in kind of the younger demographic of people looking to move out of their parents' house, I'd say it's a very welcoming sight to see a project like this presented within the community that provides opportunity for housing for so many individuals and families, along with the 15,000 square feet of commercial space. My opinion, that just provides tremendous opportunity for businesses to grow and thrive. With that, obviously, comes jobs, within the city, which is nothing but a plus. And as I see our town constantly growing and evolving, I believe a project such as Alpine 9340 will provide many positive benefits to our community. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
So thank you all for the time and efforts on this issue. Britt Cooper, 135 Sapphire Court. Great presentation. It's beautiful. A lot of time and money has been put into this, and something's going to be done with that property, be it as it's outlined today. I'm only going to give you 60 seconds here because you've heard almost everything. The annexation being lumped in with the development, there's just too much in the way of dynamics. So how can you annex and at the same time approve a development of this size? I don't understand those dynamics, but there's a lot on the table here. The last thing, Emerald Drive is a 28-lot subdivision of half-acre lots. There's basically one road, a couple little courts, 28 lots, half-acre lots. The only people that go through Emerald Drive are people that live in Emerald Heights. And that is going to change hugely. If you drive Emerald Drive. It goes from 93, about quarter of a mile down to the 40, and there's 28 lots in there. I think that it would be a travesty to allow, and you drive in there, it says private road, we maintain the road, and you tenfold the number of cars, or likely would 20-fold the number of cars on a daily basis on Emerald Drive. That's a travesty to the owners of properties that bought into a very quiet, wooded subdivision that now is going to have hundreds of additional cars daily. I don't think there's 100 cars on a daily basis from those 28 homes that go in and out. That's going to probably go up to 500 plus, and that's tragic. The project's beautiful. I think it's too big, and I don't think Emerald Drive as an ingress-egress is viable. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brett.
Good evening, councilors and mayors. My name is Dakota Whitman. I live at, funnily enough, 102 Dakota Avenue in Whitefish. And I just want to add on and speak to the experience of a young professional in the valley right now, where being in Whitefish, being a moderate income level, feels like you're in a little bit of a housing limbo, where I don't qualify for the deed restricted, but I can't afford what's on the private market. And most young professionals I know don't even live in Whitefish to begin with, and openly say they just don't even bother looking. And seeing a housing development where I can say, oh, I could actually obtain that, that's somewhere I could actually live and stay at long term, is very refreshing, and I think brings much needed economic benefits to our area, and especially from a worker's perspective like myself, because me and many like me are 1 or 2 bad breaks away from having to leave the valley in general, because there's little to no lateral mobility in the housing market right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Dakota.
Hi, Mallory Phillips. I live on Kalispell Avenue. I represent Shelter WF. Honestly, I'm a little unprepared to speak tonight. I did not expect a ton of opposition, because over and over again, when developments are proposed in town, in places that I think are great locations for density, over and over again, traffic, all of these reasons come up no matter where it is, apparently. And so I didn't have a good comment. But one thing that I really want to note that is very frustrating to hear is that we are less than 2.5 miles away at that location, and people who are living in Emerald Heights are acting as if they live in the middle of rural Montana. You live near town. I understand the frustrations, but you chose to move next to a place in which there was an open lot that could have sold at any point. I think there are some really reasonable frustrations with this development. I think that MDT should look at slowing this road down, even down to 25. I think 45 is still too fast. I think that bumping out the corners and the intersections to actually make those crosswalks walkable is something that is not unreasonable, and actually would result in people who live in this development walking and riding their bikes into town. I think it's really important, like Dakota said, there are a lot of young professionals in this community that can't afford to live here that are providing really important services. And there are also a lot of people across the economic spectrum that are part of our community. And when people continue to say renters don't matter, renters should live in Columbia Falls or Kalispell, it devalues our community. And it's not the Whitefish I grew up in. Thank you.
Thanks, Mallory. Nathan.
Hey, Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. I'm the president of Shelter WF. I don't think I have a lot to say, but we'll see how that goes. We're definitely in support of this annexation, and the renderings, and hopefully the project comes to fruition on the back end, as it's been demonstrated so far. We know already before the pandemic we were way behind on building housing. To kind of keep up with the need that we had here in Whitefish. And then the pandemic, by some estimates, throughout the western United States, kind of accelerated that price appreciation and kind of the crunch 10 to 20 years. And so if we put it in that perspective, 200 units really not that much. If we're 10 years behind, if we're 20 years behind, we're talking about 10 to 20 units a year, right, over that course of time, because the pandemic accelerated things so rapidly for where we would be otherwise if that wasn't the case. And so, you know, I've been up here and spoken on a lot of these in front of you all, and you know, I think it's probably 50-50 on the things that get approved and the things that don't get approved. But you know, I think that we've been moving in the right direction recently, and we love the mixed use aspect of this as well. Hopefully, there will be some businesses there that cater to like everyday needs. You know, is what we would hope to see, so that people don't actually have to hop in their car to go into town to do, you know, little things that you need to do every day. I think that the intersection's obviously like a huge issue. I would never want to walk across 7 lanes on 93, so I don't think there's a reason to walk over there, thankfully, at this point. But you know, I think that presents some good opportunity for the future, especially when we're talking north into town, and the transportation plan and kind of some of the plans that we have for that corridor laid out in that plan. This being like the apex of that, and being able to not only improve that intersection, but improve everything else in between. I think as an organization, we'd like to see this kind of be the outer limit of sprawl for a while. You know, I think it makes sense, being that there's 2 highways that intersect there, but there's a lot in the middle that needs filled in. You know, put some stuff closer to my house, somebody please. And yeah, so we'd like to see this approved. We'd like to see that kind of be the outer limit for a while. Let's focus on trying to fill it in and kind of limit our sprawl from this point forward. Obviously, that temptation's there once the utilities are extended across the highway there. But yeah, we'd like to see it filled in. We'd like to see the snow bus running up and down, people being able to, you know, walk or bike into town pretty easily, get across the highway safe, and asking that you vote in favor of the annexation. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead. I believe you do have in your packet the comments that we submitted earlier today. I won't go through those in detail, but I think it's a very confusing set of agreements that you have before you, so I do hope that you will table this tonight, take time to consider not only our comments, but those of the public here tonight that I think raise a lot of important issues. I would like to say that I think I'm impressed that the developer has taken time to look at quality design, but I hope that he will and his team will also join in recognizing that this needs to be tabled and given much more concern. The development agreement is woefully inadequate and really needs to be reviewed. We hope that there can be a win-win come out of this, and to that regard, we ask that you table this decision, that you hold a work session, and that you keep the public comment open, because there are just too many moving pieces to this that we need to be able to speak to in addition. I was particularly troubled by the comments that your city attorney made this evening. I appreciate her comments. I appreciate the fact that she reached out to the League of Cities attorney and director, who I respect. But I feel that it just heightens my concern for this development. I think as a city council, you have an obligation when looking at annexing property into the city. A much higher level of scrutiny is needed to really look to see how this is going to benefit the city and its residents. And so this development, this agreement, these series of agreements, if approved tonight, take place immediately. And that does not give the kind of time that this deserves to be considered. But again, going back to Angie's comments, if indeed, and I don't know that I agree with her assessment, but if indeed simply having a mixed-use building forces you to allow that use on a property, I think you have to look beyond this developer who is here from you today, because you have to consider that this developer may come and go and another may come in his place. And it appears from Angie's analysis of this that you have right now 6 apartment units and a commercial space within it. But under the new Senate Bill 245, it appears that those apartment buildings could come back to you as strip commercial on the lower level, apartments on the top, and you couldn't do anything about it. If that's the interpretation that your city attorney is providing you, I think you need to table this, look at your WBT zoning, and look at what kind of conditions amending that zone to really protect yourself from a really arbitrary and problematic legislation passed by our legislature. It does not allow you to deal with site-specific issues like this, and so I would really like to see you look at the need to revise your zoning categories. I think the fact that the developer has said that there is a draft TIS available, that should be made public, become part of the record so that the public can review it, provide comments prior to any development agreement so that it can influence what goes into the development agreement. I can't overemphasize how important it is for the public to see that. I'm working with a number of communities, and having public input on a traffic impact study is really, really important, because there are issues that get overlooked when you don't have engineers. I think Craig mentioned that if it did come before you, that he would recommend a third-party look at it. I think you need a third-party independent engineer looking at this TIS before you go forward with any annexation. Again, if the development agreement runs with the property, is filed with the plat, with the development, I don't see how you go back and change that. Within the agreement, it says both parties have to agree to any changes. There are just so many legal loopholes that I don't feel that we've had enough time to get some legal eyes looking at this. I think you need some more opinion on this. To move forward with this tonight, I think would be really bad, I guess, is short of another word. Again, I think there are issues that are in my comments that I ask you to look at. We would encourage you to look at the examples I've given you of other annexation agreements where Missoula, Billings, Great Falls, Helena, all incorporate these within a annexation agreement. The taxpayers of this city should not be held hostage to having to pay to enforce a development agreement. Your development agreement needs to be so positive for both sides that you don't have to go to court to enforce it, but if it does have to get enforced, it needs to be a shared enforcement. And I don't know that it's written in there to protect the taxpayers of the city at this point. See if I've got all my points. Thank you. I think that covers most of the points I want to make.
Thanks, Mayor.
Tom Thomas, Point of View Ranch, 5 Star Realty. We have the property listed. We've had the property listed quite a few times. We've had it under contract quite a few times. We've been turned down by the city quite a few times. We had the town pump under contract for a long time, along with other people on that side of the street. And again, the same scenario, just recently, the Wolf Auto. And we watched the hotel go down in flames, and we watched Eric Payne and Dean Gourmet go down in flames, all because we can't seem to get on the same page. And I'd like to get on the same page before I walk out of here tonight, if it's possible. This is, of all the development that we've looked at, without a doubt, the nicest one for that corner. No doubt. It's the gateway, we keep hearing that, into the city. It's a perfect development to go into that area. The options were totally off the wall on some of them. I think you have to really, really consider what we're doing. Just to read a quick quote. B2 as a residential zone that has some light, I guess I can get it close so I can read it. Commercial options, this is some light commercial options. This is not a transition business development, included professional offices, medical offices, residential use. The Whitefish goal was to have a mixed use area at the gateway of Whitefish that is appealing. Dave Taylor, your planning director. Okay, that was his quote in the paper in April of this year. This development gives you everything that you ask for. They've overdone what they had to do. They underdid what they would like to have made more money at and done a better business on from that standpoint. I don't know what to suggest, except that if this is not acceptable to you, then I'm going to make a motion. My motion would be take WBT off your table, because what you just did to Eric Payne, Dean Gourmet, on the other side of the street, when they had 11 acres, of which one fell into the WBT, and so you changed the whole thing on them, and now they're sitting there with their hands up in the air wondering, what do we do next? That's not fair to a developer, to any kind of business person. So if you're going to live by your rules, live by your rules. And then speaking of rules, Mary and I aren't always on the same page. The zoning, I'm not sure I understand what was said by Angie, but am I understanding correctly that if you turn down this development, that the zoning is also turned down? Not the zoning, I'm sorry, the annexation? Is that a question that is fair to ask? If the annexation is accepted, but the developer is given stipulations that are too difficult for them to possibly make ends meet, is that a reason to drop the annexation?
No.
It is not a reason to drop the annexation.
That's correct. Randy, correct? Angie, do you mind just addressing this question one more time?
No, I don't mind. We're doing this pursuant to the annexation in conjunction with zoning. I think you folks could still annex them, but then they would have to go through we would have to actually use our own process of instigating zoning on the parcel ourselves. If you folks will recall, that was how we used to do it. Someone would apply for annexation, and then we would reinstitute the zoning. I think as Wendy calls out in her staff report, we have generally tried to zone as close to the equivalent county that we could, and that would be WB2.
But it would still be under the Whitefish umbrella at that point.
Yes.
I think that is extremely unfair to both the developer and the owner of the property, because you're locking them into something, and you can throw anything you want as far as what you
feel they have to have transportation-wise, sidewalk-wise, et cetera, and make it impossible, they lose out. Somebody else comes in, maybe a friend, maybe not a friend, doesn't put a development nearly as nice, but you decide to pass it through. The owner of the property is stuck. I think that if that is really the case, personally, and I know I'm not supposed to say this, I'd drop this whole thing right now and walk. I wouldn't want it annexed into the city. I've been through too much with your city, and to say that I could trust you, I can't say that. I've seen too many things fall to the wayside. Thank you.
Ed Doctor, 845 Wisconsin. I sell pizza, beer, skis, and weed, and I need, what? That's a great slogan. What more do you need? And I need employees, and you guys know I'm normally support pretty much any development. One thing that's on my mind is, less apartments, higher home values. And, I get it. I think there's a lot of people that take that very seriously in our community. If you kind of kick out the working class, our property values you keep going up, and I think there's people that enjoy that and do want that, and I understand that to a point. But as a business owner, I really do support the annexation. I understand there's more of a conversation that needs to be had, but mostly, like, when these things come up, I'm normally in the minority of people supporting them. I don't want stuff in my backyard either. But as a guy like me and a lot of people like me, we want to keep our businesses alive. I don't have privy to J1 employees. I don't. Corporations do. Corporations could care less if this apartment building comes in. But I think a lot of small business people do. And I don't know many small business people that are against it. I'm sure they're out there. But we've all felt how hard it is to find a house here, to find housing, to find anywhere to live. And with all the apartments, that they're building in Kalispell and stuff, and I've heard the conversation saying, well, why don't our employees live down there? And I'll be honest, man, everybody has worked for me over the years that have moved out do not work for me anymore. It's just way too competitive down there. Their wages are just as good or better. So, again, I really support this. I also support more of a conversation about it, but it's just something I'd like to see happen. I really think it's a good development. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Further public comment from the audience. Michelle, how about online?
Yes, we have a couple. So far, we have two. If anybody else would like to speak, please raise your hand. We're going to start with Joe H. Please unmute your mic and state your name and address, please.
Joe Hess, 1275 Lion Mountain. I'm a business owner, two businesses in town as well. And, I do appreciate all the comments on both sides of the argument here. I mean, we do need housing. It's never in the right spot for everyone. There's obviously conversations that need to continue around this project and the traffic and other things that have been brought up, which are legitimate. But at the same time, it's the entrance to the city. It will be developed at some point. We have a great direction at this point from the developers, it looks like, and an opportunity to really make it a nice entrance to the city. And I, fall in the support column. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren, if you'd like to unmute your mic and speak your name and address, please.
Lauren Stevens, 344 Blanchard Hollow. I grew up in Whitefish and I've lived here forever, currently living down in Missoula, but I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, this parcel's just been vacant for as long as I can remember, and I think that this development would be a significantly better gateway view coming into the city than dirt and a fireworks stand every now and then. I fall into that class of young professionals that would not be able to afford to live here at this point, and so I think that having more options, apartments or otherwise, is always great. I feel like people living in apartments become criminalized. Everyone just worries that them moving in will somehow, ruin the whole neighborhood, and I'm not sure exactly why. But I just think it's important tonight to remember that a development agreement is not something that's required with an annexation request. This is just something that developers usually do to help assure people that what's going to happen there is a little bit more planned out. This could just be submitted as a petition to annex with no context, and then I'm not sure if that would have more or less conversation, frankly, but I think it's just important to see if it's meeting the criteria to annex and go from there. The traffic impact would be reviewed at building permit, which was noted by Public Works. Emerald Drive is a public road and it does actually cut through this property. So I think it's more than fair to let that be an access point if engineering says it works. The traffic impact study, probably if anywhere in the city would say that there's enough capacity for new traffic, it's here. It's two major highways connecting. And if not, then I think we would probably end up with a light at Emerald Drive or something, which it sounds like everyone who lives there would want to see anyway. So I think that the traffic impact study might actually be a good thing. And lastly, just a barrier between that parking area and the existing homes. I think that would be important. I don't know if it has to be like a solid wall or anything, but just kind of splitting off headlights and that stuff. But people that live back there also do have the opportunity to put a fence on their property if they're really concerned with people walking through. So thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Is there anybody else online who would like to speak? Please raise your hand. We're good. Thanks, John.
I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and we're going to recess till 9:35 and just take a short break. Thanks. Folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you don't mind taking your seats, please. Get out of here. Have a brew.
What's that?
What's that? I know, right? So we're back in session. We did close the public hearing, and now we'll turn it back to the council for discussion or direction one way or another. Steve?
Just have a couple questions,
Please.
if I may, unless somebody would like to make a different motion before I ask questions. Okay, then I'll proceed. Craig, I'm a little confused exactly what we're on the hook for and what the developer's on the hook for with regard to Emerald Drive. If you could clarify that for me. Where'd Craig go? There he is.
So the developer would be on the hook for any improvements required to Emerald Drive. What I can't tell you is exactly what those improvements will be. There hasn't been a traffic impact study completed yet. We don't have a building permit application. We don't have a conditional use permit application. We don't have a PUD application. And so we don't have a trigger to require that TIS. When the TIS comes in, we'll see exactly what impact the new trips will require and what improvements exactly will be demanded upon Emerald Drive. And so at that point, assuming we're in concurrence with the recommendations of the traffic impact study, the developer will be responsible for making those improvements.
And that'll just go up to the edge of the subdivision or all the way through to Highway 40, those improvements?
So Emerald would not, it would be up to the edge of the subdivision.
Okay.
Well, I guess I can't say that for certain. It's conceivable that a traffic impact study could show numerous additional trips all the way between Highway 40 and the subdivision on Emerald Drive, in which case improvements could be warranted, which the developer would be responsible for.
Okay, and it would be, and then at that point it would have to be constructed to city standards in terms of width?
Correct. Well, it would be, improvements would be dictated by the traffic impact study, and yeah, likely those improvements would be up to city standard.
Okay, and do we have standards for grade?
We do.
Okay, and conceivably that would also be an issue?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
The grade coming off of Highway 93 into the subdivision on Emerald Heights Drive would definitely be considered when we get to that level of detail.
Okay, thank you. And then Wendy, or maybe it was Angie, you said that if we annex without an agreement, without a development agreement, that we would zone it WB2 because that's the nearest, closest, it would be WBT, correct?
Yeah, WBT because that complies with our growth policy.
With our growth policy. I thought somewhere in the discussion I heard that we would go to WB2.
Well, that's one of there's like 3 different tests that you can do, and one of them is it the closest equivalent to the county, and the WB2 is the closest equivalent.
Okay.
But the WBT implements our growth policy.
Right, and ultimately city council has the final say on what something gets zoned once it's annexed.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those are my only questions.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I just have, I just forgot what it was. It was for Craig. Okay, sorry. Someone else can go and I'll think of it.
Other questions for staff? Ben?
Another quick one for Craig. Craig, do you think that the speed limit on Highway 93 will be moved in conjunction with this project?
So MDT has a fairly elaborate process for adjusting speed limits. They start with what's called a speed study, and they look at what the average speeds are and what they feel the safe speeds are. It's not a quick process, but I would think that it's conceivable that the speed limit could be reduced south of Highway 40 on 93. I don't think 25 miles an hour is feasible, but I would think a 45 mile an hour further up the hill could be possible. But again, it would have to go through that warrants process that MDT takes pretty seriously, and it's all based on federal highway standards.
And is that something that would be done when? Prior to the building of this project or after?
It would likely be a recommendation of the traffic impact study that a speed study be completed, and the speed limit on that section of Highway 93 be evaluated.
Would you be following through with that to make sure that a hopefully logical conclusion is reached about the best way to do that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Rebecca.
Craig, you mentioned that possibly having a third traffic engineer be involved that would be more neutral for, could you explain how that would work if we were to hire one for the city? Is that what you meant when you said that?
Yeah, and we've done that before with the recent corridor project between Colorado and Texas. We hired KLJ as a third-party engineer who recently completed our transportation plan to review that traffic study. And I would think that, you know, given the impact of this project, it would be warranted as well.
The second, I just would like someone to outline for the public what the sequence would follow from this night forward. So if tonight this property was annexed, we accepted the developer's agreement, then what happens?
I would expect it would follow our regular development review process, which would be coming to site review with more refined plans than what were shown to you. I mean, we have pretty good detailed drawings. And then they would submit their engineering plans, architectural review would happen, and then building permit.
And would the public be invited to participate at some point in the future?
There's no public hearings. There would be no public hearings. We do advertise our architectural review committee, but that would be the only committee that's kind of technically advertised.
With the exception of the CUP required for the commercial component?
Well, there's kind of some question about that.
Yeah, so Angie and I, in looking at Senate Bill 245, I think it's a question whether or not we can require a CUP for that commercial portion. When you read that definition of mixed development, that has to be a permitted use now due to the state legislature. They're the ones that are requiring this of us. And why you actually have a developer agreement with this annexation, because we know that Senate Bill 245 has opened up the doors that if it's zone commercial, they can do whatever density they can fit within our setbacks. So what I believe we have to determine is if a CUP is even allowed. A mixed development is a mixed development for the lot or development, not per building. So I think when you look at it, the amount of housing they are providing exceeds the 50% of what would be needed for commercial. So I don't believe a CUP would be allowed for this development, and thus you would not have another public hearing process. And Angie can weigh in.
Yeah, Dana and I were actually just looking at the language of this bill kind of during this meeting. And I mean, I think it's questionable whether or not we have to, if it's 50% or less, we have to allow mixed use development as a use by right. I mean, there is sort of a question, can we regulate the kinds of uses? But as I read the bill, just the plain language of the bill, that they would probably not have to, because they're not subdividing the property. So when you look at this development, it truly is one development. And unfortunately, that was the legislature's decision. I think it kind of ties our hands as far as this goes. So you folks might not see a CUP application for the commercial portion of it, which I believe is 15,000 square feet or less.
Ben?
Well, Angie, then what are the allowed uses, commercial uses on this property then?
Wendy, hold on, Ben, I don't
mean a list, but I mean, we have by right uses and we have conditional uses. And if no conditional use permit would be applied for at a later date, can they still use the conditional uses, I guess?
I think that they could. Yeah, that's my question as well. There are some permitted uses in the WBT, but as you folks will recall, the majority of uses in that zone are conditional uses. And if we can't Senate Bill 245 require, if they have to be permitted as a right, I don't know that few folks would see a CUP.
Can they do commercial uses that are not allowed at all under the transitional zoning district? Build an asphalt plant with apartments on the top.
That's an industrial use.
Still, you get my point.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question either, Ben. I think that Senate Bill 245 is less than clear. I think their intention was to provide for additional housing without the layers of CUPs and PUDs. I don't think you'd ever see an asphalt, residential above an asphalt plant. But I think the question remains is, if they're required to be an actual permitted use, can we add that extra layer of what types of uses? And as I read the plain language of the bill, I don't think we can.
Further questions? Steve, did you have? Andy, anything? Ben?
I'm sorry to continue on this path, but like when we were talking about this earlier, Wendy, you said, and my joke was, can you do a Walmart with apartment in it? And you said no, because that Walmart would not be permitted as a use in that zoning district.
Right, because retail is not a permitted use in the WBT, but yeah, I guess I don't know.
But would what Angie just said mean that
I'm not sure if it's
anything
all
goes?
commercial uses or just the conditional uses in the zoning district would now become permitted uses. I don't know. I think we need to do more.
Yeah, I think we probably need to do a little bit more research, and I don't know that anybody's going to know because this is such a new bill. I mean, I would think that you could do the permitted uses within the district, but you just wouldn't require a CUP. So the conditional uses would basically just become a permitted use. That would be how I would interpret it. But again, it's not like the legislature gave us much to work with.
Frank and then Steve.
Generalized question for Angie and anybody that might be listening. It seems to me that we're stuck kind of here between a rock and a hard place. A solution to the Senate bill that is giving us so many problems might be a detailed development agreement. Could that serve the same purposes as, for lack of a better description, if we wanted to go that direction and the developer did, solve the problem between any possible permitted use in that zone as opposed to ones that they would normally have to come back here for a conditional use? We have that discussion now, put it as part of the development agreement, and then move forward. Is that an option, Angie?
Yeah, I think if the developer were willing to restrict some of their uses as part of a development agreement and as part of receiving city sewer and water, which of course is a giant benefit to this property, I think if they were willing to consider that as part of the development agreement, yeah, I mean, we can kind of agree to whatever we want. It's not a conversation that we really have had, or at least I have. I've only been in one meeting, but have had that. But I think if that were part of the development agreement, sure.
Okay. Steve? Oh, I'm sorry, Frank.
Go right ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to postpone for 2 weeks this.
There's a motion on the table to postpone to the October 16th meeting, leaving the public hearing open.
Yes, leave the public
Leaving the
hearing.
public hearing open. That motion's been seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. What was that, Dakota? Why didn't we postpone it 2 hours ago? No. Oh, okay.
2 hours ago, I was about to vote.
I mean, Wendy was sitting up there saying, I don't even know the answer to that question.
exactly.
I mean,
That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask the exact same thing.
What's that?
I was going to ask the exact same thing.
What I had?
You said about using the developer agreement to solve this problem.
It's our only tool. developer agreement is now our PUD. That's kind of where we are.
I want time to look at those examples Mary gave us too. I mean, there's examples from Billings, Missoula, Helena. I mean, they're not. Four more to go. We're going to move on to item 7B of our agenda, which is consideration of a request from Gordon Tate and Michelle Jantz for a conditional use permit to use an accessory primary residence as a guest house located at 2120 Houston Drive. The property zoned WSR, which is our suburban residential district. Evening.
Evening. So yeah, like you said, the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to use an existing home as a guest house ahead of the construction of a new primary residence. So the existing home on the property would be the guest house, and then there's no home built yet. There's no building permit applied for the second home because you would need this conditional use permit before you could begin that process. So this property is located at 2120 Houston Drive. It's about 33,976 square feet. The residential zones, it's WSR, and so are the neighboring properties, as well as the lake is to the south. The WSR is intended for residential purposes that provide for one family in an urban setting. The utilities, it is currently is on septic. The water does come from the lake and a well, but there are utilities on Houston Drive. So yeah, public notice was mailed to adjacent landowners, the sign was posted on the property, and the notice was mailed to adjacent advisory agencies, published in the Whitefish pilot. I received about 5 public comments now after. And a lot of them had concerns over private matters involving, just want to talk about now, there is an easement that comes up in those public comments as a way to access lower in the lot. And that they're saying that this applicant wants to use that as their primary access to the future home. But I just want to comment that is not exactly pertinent to the use of the existing home as a guest house. And that is a private matter that I cannot particularly, condition on. So to review the findings of fact, it does comply with the growth policy designation of suburban. Guest houses are a residential use. So compliance with the regulations. So the deck and a portion of the garage are currently on the neighbor's property. So there is an existing deck that encroaches on the property, so as well as part of the garage. The guest house itself does not, but it is in the setback. But there is no, and so the deck will be required to be removed from the neighbor's property, as a condition that I'll get into later. So parking wise, they need 2 spaces for the for the primary home and 1 for the guest house. While there isn't going to be a primary home until later, they do have enough room in the driveway to accommodate 3 9x20 parking spaces, regardless of the garage, but there is a 2-car garage. Height, there is a maximum of 24 feet for accessory buildings, which the guest house would be if a primary home is built. It's currently at 22 feet. Lot coverage is 25% maximum in the district, and it's currently at 5. And again, when a building permit comes in for the primary residence, I'll take a look at that at time of building permit to make sure it's still meeting those standards. Guest house standards, it has to be detached, located in a lot that meets the minimum lot size. There's only 1 permitted per lot. All parking space must be provided, and the guest house is only for guests. A deed restriction will be required, ensuring that those standards are met. So the finding 2, all the zoning standards are being met or will be met with conditions of approval or remediated. So the site, the structure, so the garage and the deck on the structure are non-conforming with regards to setbacks, but there are no alterations or extensions planned for the guest home. They did receive a building permit to redo the siding and some windows, but there's no plan to expand that home as it is, and they would be allowed to do so as long as any expansion does not increase the nonconformity of the structure. I.e., they cannot further go into the setback, but can expand it as long as all the other zoning regulations are met. So finding 3, the site is suitable for the proposed use because the lot has adequate land area to meet lot coverage. Existing access is adequate for the guest home. There are no environmental hazards that impact the use of the existing home as a guest home. And any environmental considerations for the primary home will be looked at time of building permit as far as lakeshore protection regulations, buffers, and those sorts of environmental factors. The site plan is effectively dealt, finding 4, the site plan is effectively dealt with design issues as the project meets the required parking, traffic circulation won't be impacted, any new utilities will be placed underground. Finding 5, so public facilities are available and services, because municipal services are available on site, water and sewer. It is not yet hooked up to sewer, but as a planning board did recommend a condition to require the guest house connect to sewer. And response times for fire police are not anticipated to be affected. Finding 6, the proposed development is not anticipated to have a negative neighborhood impact because the impacts of noise, dust, smoke, odor, or other environmental nuisances are not expected to be associated with the use of a guest house. Finding 7, the project is compatible with the existing uses in the neighborhood and is consistent with the design, size, and density of the immediate area. Again, it is existing home in the neighborhood. So it was recommended by the planning board that the Whitefish City Council adopt the findings of fact within staff for WCUP 23-04, and that the conditional use permit be approved by the Whitefish City Council subject to the following conditions. And there's the standard conditions. It must comply with the site plan submitted August 3rd, except as amended. Minor deviations from the plan require review pursuant to section 11-7-838. Minor deviations, the applicant must maintain and demonstrate continued compliance with all adopted city codes and ordinances. 1 off-street parking space must be designated for the guest house and 2 for the primary residence. All areas disturbed because of the road and utility construction must be reseeded as soon as practical to inhibit erosion and spread of noxious weeds. All noxious weeds must be removed throughout the life of the development, must be dark sky compliant. Prior to submitting a building permit, the property owner must provide the city a recorded copy of either a deed restriction or restrictive covenant that the guest house may not be used for rental purposes as a permanent residence for anyone employed in a home occupation on the subject property or as a short-term rental. Its conditional use permit is valid for 18 months and shall terminate unless the commencement of the authorized activity is begun. The encroaching deck must be reduced to 5 feet from the property line or reduced off the neighboring property and fire rated as required by building code. And kind of what this means is, so they either can go up to the property line or they can go 5 feet on their side of the property over, because anything within 5 feet of the property line needs to be fire rated due to building code. So that's why that's in there. The guest house must not exceed 24 feet in height as it is an accessory building. The guest house must be connected to city sewer, is that last condition. And then, again, the planning board made that motion to add the condition that it be connected to city sewer.
Thanks, Nelson. Any questions for Nelson on his staff report? Rebecca?
This is kind of a weird one. Don't you have to have a primary house to have an accessory building?
Yes, so they are applying for a guest house ahead. It is confusing. They're applying for a guest house ahead of the construction of a primary home because they wouldn't be able to build another home without this conditional use permit for a guest house. So if they get this conditional use permit, they would, be able to apply for a building permit for another home, and that would be the primary residence going forward, and this would be the guest house.
And then, do they need to come back to us after they build the primary home to get, no, because we've already given them a guest house without a primary home.
Correct, yep, this is needed for the guest house, and then a primary residence would just follow the typical building permit procedure.
Okay, and then we did get a letter from an attorney talking about easement challenges, and what your opinion is that we should ignore all of those private easement challenges in this decision.
Yes, that will be, any access to a primary residence in the future will be dealt with at the building permit process at that stage.
So the easements may be corrected at that time, and the setback issues?
So the conditions on this permit I have that they would need to remove the deck off the property. That's the only setback issue that would be resolved, and it's not, it's currently non-conforming, so we're not going to be able to make them, tear their garage down and tear the whole thing, whole deck down, but we will be able to make them take it off of their neighbor's property.
Okay.
Further questions? Frank?
I guess, Rebecca, can I just chime in too, just to help Nelson out a little bit? The easement issue it's private issue, so it's the encroachment issue, although we are, I think, doing what we can by making at least their deck encroachment not encroach on their neighbor's property. One of Sean's suggestions in his letter was a condition of approval that successful permitting and construction of the primary residence be made a condition. I'm not horribly uncomfortable with that condition, truthfully. As Nelson said, when they only need one spot for this guest house, but when they come in for their primary residence, we'll check to make sure that they have adequate parking. If the neighbors are successful in challenging this easement so that the applicant cannot use the easement to park on, then that's something that we would deal with at building permit.
Thank you, Angie.
We did advertise for a public hearing, and we will hold that public hearing now. Is the applicant present? Do you have anything to add? Any public comment? Sir?
Brad Bulkley, 2124 Houston Drive. I'm immediately to the west of Mr. Tate. I'm going to make it short and sweet out of respect for council.
Thanks, Brad.
Given what's going on. My understanding about a CUP is it cannot be approved if there are encroachments, existing encroachments, which there are. It's not only the deck, a third of their garage is on our property. Said applicant has refused to do anything about it. That's why you're seeing letters from Frampton and Purdy on my behalf. So I would ask that the approval be denied, or at least be a condition precedent to satisfying that, because he's on my property and he's refusing to vacate. So it's going to have to be worked out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Further comment this evening? Anyone online, Michelle?
It looks like Kate, if you'd like to unmute your mic and state your name and address, please. Thanks.
You're breaking up, Kate. Sorry, Kate, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I plugged back in.
There
Can
you
you
are.
hear me better now?
Yep,
Okay,
that's great.
sorry about that. So I was the applicant for Gordon and Michelle on this project. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Kate. Any questions for the applicant's representative?
Are you going to remove the encroaching garage? Are you guys going to remove the encroaching garage?
This was an existing structure, to my knowledge. There are no plans to remove it, but I have not been privy to any of those discussions.
Hey, Frank, can I chime in again? I'm sorry, I'm talkative tonight.
Thanks.
There actually is an encroachment agreement that, it might have been with their predecessors. I'm not sure if it was with Brad or not. But they do have a private encroachment agreement between the neighbors that basically provides that if they, let me read it, I'm sorry, hold on a sec. that upon substantial modification of the garage, that they will basically get rid of the encroachment. So that is a private agreement, again, between the two parties or their predecessors in interest that the city wouldn't really get in the middle of.
Agreed. Angie, I like the suggested additional condition that was provided here. Would we also place an additional condition on here that that to the extent there's an encroachment agreement, that any questions regarding that encroachment agreement should be resolved prior to or as part of the approval of this CUP?
I don't think we want to get in the middle of their encroachment agreement, Frank. I think that it's between them and doesn't really have anything to do. If they've agreed that that encroachment can remain until there's a significant change, whatever that may be, that would be between them to basically, I guess, duke it out over that encroachment agreement. I think what we can do is require them to at least remove the part of the deck that is encroaching. And the other condition I think you're referring to is one that Sean proposed, that condition of approval should be the successful permitting and construction of the primary residence, which frankly I think kind of makes sense because it does seem kind of strange to have this guest house come before the primary residence. It's my understanding, and I could be off base, that the reason that they went the guest house route is because the house itself is too big to be an ADU.
Steve?
Can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that we deny CUP.
Did you close the public hearing?
Did you
I
close
have
it?
not, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask
are there
that
any-
question first.
That's okay. Further public comments this evening? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thanks, Steve.
Make a motion that we deny WCUP 23-04.
Is there a second to the motion?
For purposes of discussion, I will be happy to second it.
Seconded by Counselor Sweeney. Steve, would you like to talk to your motion?
Yeah, CUP is a conditional use permit. It is discretionary upon this council whether we approve it or not. There are more than one. There's a building that's built on half of it, that's 30% on the person's property. The deck hangs over into their property. They have plenty of room to build a house first and then come back and ask for this. I don't see why we would go the opposite route and ignore all these other issues that are there and approve this with all those other issues.
Dave, did you have a comment?
I'm just going to note two things. One, that the existing encroachments are what we consider legal non-conforming buildings that were built, not in violation of our code because they predated that. And then secondly, we cannot grant a building permit for a new building unless they have a conditional use permit for a guest house. For this one, so because there'd be two dwelling units on the lot, so we would not allow that. So they could not get a building permit to build their primary house until CUP is granted. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
I'm still not sympathetic to the issue.
Further discussion? Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm inclined to approve it just because it allows the project to move forward. And our planning staff has come up with this solution. It's a very strange situation, but I think legally, our attorney is telling us that we don't have a right to resolve the easement issue. We have the right to give a CUP for a guest house. That's it. I mean, is that what you're saying, Dave? We don't really have the right to intervene with the easement problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's between the two parties. I mean, then they have an encroachment agreement. If you deny the CP, then they'll just have to continue to live in that house and they wouldn't be able to build a second house on the property.
And I guess I'm thinking if they proceed with building a second house, they might be willing to actually meet the neighbors where legally they're required to meet them, but.
Mr. Mayor, I think a point of order, I think we have a motion and a second. We've had discussion. I think we need to deal with that motion before we proceed one way or the other.
Agree.
I think we've got to do that.
Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And that motion, Andy, how did you vote? That motion does fail on a 4-1 vote. Who would like to motion? Let's get this meeting moving along.
I will move to approve
WCUP 23-04.
WCUP 23-04.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
Yeah, could I just make a
Yes,
quick
please.
comment? The easement issue, I don't think is anything we can have anything to do with, and we can't possibly sort that out here. And as Dave just said, it's a legal non-conforming structure, so I came in here wondering why on earth we even have these at council meetings. So hopefully the processes between the private parties can sort all the other issues out. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ben.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move for a friendly amendment to the added additional condition to this approval, which would be the condition of approval should be a successful permitting of the construction of the Tate home, the primary residence.
I'll take that as a friendly amendment, an added condition. We'll vote on that amendment first. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion carries on a 4-1 vote with Quinnell voting in opposition, which brings us back to our original motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion does carry on a 4-1 vote with Councilor Sweeney voting in opposition.
No, I did not. Quinnell.
Quinnell, excuse me.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 7C of our agenda, which will be ordinance 23-20, amending zoning regulations, Title 11, Chapter 9, Section 2, definitions regarding casinos of the Whitefish City Code. And this will be on a first reading. Dave.
Good evening. So on August 7th, you held a work session where we had a discussion about the casino overlay zone and how that might be amended to allow for a few gaming machines at local businesses that already had a all beverage license or other kind of state liquor license that would enable them to have gaming machines. And based on your direction, we brought forward this text amendment that would basically amends the definition of casino to be establishment that has 6 or more video gambling machines or gambling devices, along with card games, Calcutta pools, and other types of things. And so basically 5 or less Keno machines or other type of video gaming machines would be allowed as long as they could get the license for that through the state. Currently, the only casinos are only allowed within the casino overlay zone. There's only 2 casinos currently in that zone. The rest of the town, there's several grandfathered ones, but there really isn't an opportunity to add gaming machines, even one, to a business anywhere within the city unless you're within that casino overlay zone. So based on the direction that we got from the city council at the work session, we reviewed that according to the code. It does comply with the growth policy and other findings to do a zoning text amendment. We brought this to the Whitefish City Planning Board on September 14th. They did unanimously recommend approval. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions on Dave's staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-20, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony? Ed.
Hello, Ed Doctor, 845 Wisconsin Avenue. I strongly support you guys passing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Further comments from the public? Michelle, anyone online? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, preferably.
Mr. Mayor,
Steve?
I move that we approve ordinance number 23-20, an ordinance amending zoning regulations, the definitions of casino.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Ed. We'll move on to item 7D of our agenda, which will be ordinance 23-21, an ordinance amending Title 6, Chapter 1, Section 9, one-way traffic, and this will be on a first reading. Craig.
All right, more traffic talk with Craig. So for this one, we're going to focus our attention on East 6th Street, where we've seen significant changes in traffic based on the opening of the reconstructed Muldown School. We have made some traffic changes around the school to try and mitigate some of the issues that we found. All of these trying to reduce potential conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians while improving efficiency for morning drop-off and afternoon pickup. So what we've really discovered in the last year with the new entrance to, or at least the kindergarten entrance to Muldown School being on the west side, is that this block of East 6th Street is very popular for parents to either drop kids off to walk across Pine Street or to walk their children down East 6th Street and across Pine. The section of right-of-way on this block is narrower than the rest of the city. When this portion of Whitefish was platted for some reason or another, we were only left with 40 feet of right-of-way on East 6th Street between Park and Pine. So there's not enough room to safely move 2 lanes of traffic and have safe bicycling and pedestrian activities. And this all just gets even worse during the winter when we have snow berms to mitigate and less light to manage the crossing in the morning. So we've had a kind of a small group of parents and teachers and staff that have met out there on a couple of occasions, and we think that the most efficient means to mitigate this will make East 6th Street one-way eastbound between Park Avenue and Pine Avenue, and kind of stripe a bicycle and pedestrian lane on the north side of the street. We feel that making these changes will provide a safe location for students to walk to school while still maintaining adequate vehicular ingress and egress for residents in the neighborhood. The Bike Pedestrian Committee, we actually met out there this morning at 8 a.m. and observed, and later they had a meeting and there was a motion made that was unanimously approved to support this ordinance. There's also a number of comments in your packet supporting this change. It's not anticipated that the ordinance will result in any additional cost to enforce, and completing the transition can be done by the public works staff with some street signs and pavement markings. I anticipate about $2,000 will happen. There will be no new street lights with this project, Frank. So based on that, staff does respectfully recommend that council hold a public hearing to consider the adoption of the attached ordinance designating one-way traffic on East 6th Street between Park Avenue and Pine Avenue.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig on his staff report? We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-21. Is there any public testimony tonight? I knew you stuck around for some reason.
I got to see this through.
Right?
We're into the 3rd year of working on this. So, Tyler Hope, 517 Summers Avenue. And Craig said it all. Just want to say, speak in support of it. You have my letter.
Yep.
And I also wanted to say thank you for meeting at 7:10. It's a nice
Of course.
tribute.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks, Tyler. Any further public comments? Can you go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council? Frank?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve what is now going to be our ordinance, I think 23-21, ordinance amending Title 6, Chapter 1, Section 9, one-way traffic, first reading on 6th Avenue.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous, Michelle. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate the letter. We'll move on to item 7E, which will be ordinance 23-22, an ordinance amending zoning regulations, Title 11, Chapter 3, Section 1, accessory dwelling units, Section 2, accessory dwelling units, and Chapter 9, Section 2, definitions of Whitefish City Code, and this will be on a first reading. Dave.
Good evening once again. So the state recently passed Senate Bill 528, which specifically addressed accessory dwelling units. Unfortunately for us, we had just finished updating our ADU standards and provided an incentive program after many months of wrangling to get that through, and this new 528 basically gutted that whole thing. And so some of the new requirements from 528, the accessory dwelling unit can't be more than 75% of the gross area of the single-family dwelling or more than 1,000 square feet. So our current limit is 600 square feet. based on that, it has to go up to 1,000. We had provided an incentive for people to go to 800 if they were willing to be part of our rental locals program. And so that, basically all the incentives of that rental locals program were eliminated with this new law. We can't require an off-street parking space. That was one of our incentives. We can't have any requirement that the ADU match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finish materials. We didn't have that in there, but we can't require that. We can't require an owner occupancy thing. That was something that we had for a long time, that we removed that when we did our previous amendments to this section. We can't require that there's some kind of familial, marital, or employment relationship from the occupant of the ADU. We can't charge an impact fee. Again, that was one of our incentives that we had previously, so that goes away. We can't require improvements to public streets as a condition. And we can't really treat an ADU, if it's detached, any differently than a single-family home, which is kind of significant, because currently with accessory buildings, we have a 24-foot height limit, or we had a 26-foot height limit for an ADU. We can't have a height limit now for a detached ADU, which unfortunately could mean that somebody built an ADU that goes up to 35 feet, which is the height limit in most zones. Hopefully we won't see that, but it is a concern for sure. And then we can't require any restrictive covenants, based on the use of that ADU. So basically, in summary, we're removing the parking requirements, we're removing building height restrictions, and are exempt from accessory building requirements that a detached accessory dwelling not be forward of the foundation of a primary dwelling. We have something in our code that doesn't allow a shed or an accessory building or a garage to be forward of the foundation of the main house unless there's an extenuating circumstance. And since we can't treat an ADU any differently, we had to remove that as well. So within these proposed changes, basically we're just modifying some things, increasing the size of the building up to 1,000 feet or 75%, getting rid of the parking requirement, getting rid of all the stuff that we had in there with regard to design standards and our incentive program. And then within the accessory building code, we had to put an exemption for detached accessory dwelling units as far as building height goes. And as far as whether they can be set forward to the foundation line. And then in our definitions, we basically just eliminated some language in there about the deed restrictions for the ADU as part of that rental locals program. So in reviewing this, we do have some housing parts of our growth policy that do encourage, affordable housing and infill, which ADUs do provide that. Most of this was pretty much pushed on us by the state. It doesn't, some of the other criteria maybe don't apply, but we did bring this to the city planning board at their September meeting. Turn to the right page here. So the board unanimously recommended approval of this. There was a friendly amendment. There was one word in there that needed to be fixed. That's in the ordinance. It's already in there. The ordinance reflects the planning board's recommendation. They did recommend approval, and staff does recommend approval. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Rebecca?
Dave, is there a change to the setbacks?
So the setbacks would be the same as a single-family home.
Okay.
They can't be more restrictive, but they can be less restrictive. So if someone has an ADU that's 600 square feet or less than an accessory building, there is a reduced setback for buildings under 600 square feet. But so they could get a reduced setback, but we can't be more restrictive and require a bigger setback, basically.
I don't know what you just said, so yes.
0 cents. But
So yes,
the setbacks don't really change.
Okay, but, okay. So, we have gone up to 11 ADUs this year. Is that what you were saying? Is that about right?
I don't remember the number now.
Okay.
I'd have to look that up again, but.
Yeah, our average was 7 per year.
We had quite a few ones that were built with just a building permit last year once we got rid of the conditional use permit requirement, for
Okay.
sure. And we had one that entered into our rental locals program.
Oh, we did?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-22. Is there any public comment this evening? Michelle, anyone online? Negative. Go ahead and close the public hearing. Frank?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance 23-22, ordinance amending our zoning regulations as required by state law and forced upon us.
Thank you, Frank. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? Okay.
I'm voting no out of protest because I watched these hearings and there was a legislator that had two bills proposed to solve this solution. And one was to study short-term rentals for 2 years, and the other one was to study ADUs for accessory dwelling units and short-term rentals for 2 years. And that would have been a very appropriate way to deal with this issue that compounds our housing deficit. And so I'm really mad about it. I think it's taken away all of our local control. So I'm voting against it, even though I know you guys are going to vote for it. But I just wanted to openly protest it somehow.
Thanks, Rebecca. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 4-1 vote with Councilor Norton voting in opposition. We'll move on to item 8, communications from city manager. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Anything additional to report on, Dana?
Just a reminder that we'll be closed on Monday for Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day. And we will also, many of us will be gone next week at the Montana League of Cities and Towns Conference in Helena.
Thank you, Dana. We'll move on to item 8C, consideration of an amendment to the developer agreement with the Whitefish Housing Authority for the Depot Park Townhome Snow Lot Project. Dana.
Good evening, Council. In the packet, my staff report is on page 226. The amendment to the development agreement, I did hand out an amended version based on correspondence I had with the Housing Authority this morning. So we will go over that. But this project has been in the works for some time. We've referred to it as the Snow Lot Project. It is now referred to as the Depot Park Townhomes Project, for which the city transferred the land of the snow lot to the Housing Authority and executed the related development agreement, which is also in the packet. We have since also, the council verbally committed $2 million to cover the financial gap for that project. During that time, we had originally intended to use our state and local fiscal recovery funds, part of the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, monies that we've received. However, there have been some changes to the federal guidance on use of our SLFRF funds. And so we are now meeting the $10 million or less limit to be able to claim those funds as revenue replacement or revenue loss. It reduces our reporting requirements with the federal government. They've done this because a lot of small communities aren't used to getting large federal grants. And so we no longer have to prove that we had revenue loss. It's just an assumed revenue loss of 10 million or less. Communities, though, like the county, for example, who's receiving 24 million, can only use up to 10 million of that 24 million as revenue loss. The rest they have to go through as a project. So the recommendation from staff is to, identify our $2 million. The remainder, the like 1.25 roughly, 125,000 we also received in addition to 2 million. We've already identified as revenue loss for the Parks Department in this year's fiscal budget. So the recommendation would be to move forward with that 2 million being identified as revenue loss under this ability for us to use the standard allowance. And then the $2 million that was verbally committed for the housing project would just come from our general fund revenues, essentially. So there would be limited restrictions from the federal government. So in other words, the only restrictions on this $2 million would be what council sets. Otherwise, you're looking at using this $2 million for incomes of 80% AMI or less, and you have a spending window, and you'd have to have all funds committed by December of 2024, spent by December of 2026. And the term committed and obligated is questionable if that includes contracts that have been awarded. We've had kind of different guidance there. And so with that, we also looked at the agreement, knowing that we needed to make that $2 million effective within the agreement that also identifies other funding the city has provided. And the term had expired this July. So in the amendment to the development agreement that is in your packet, there are three changes. One is the term, extending that for an additional 3 years to allow for the completion of construction. Obviously, we hope that that's much shorter than 3 years. And Dwan is online if you have any questions for him. But they do intend to break ground this October. And then we have the $2 million identified within city funding for this project. And then finally, the third change, as we've seen with Trailview needing to look at other alternatives for funding projects and knowing there is likely a financial gap that maybe Dwan can expand on for us, there was a request to change the range of AMI served. The AMI served would still be the 80 to 120%, but instead of an average of 100, they would like the average to be 120% to give more flexibility to allow for higher income ranges to be served. So what was proposed originally, the 80 to 200 with an average of 150, that was I had received that in an email, but later the board determined that they could not go above 120% without putting other funding at risk from donors, et cetera. So again, Dwan's online if you have questions for him. My biggest part for me here was getting the term extended because we have an expired agreement and the $2 million, but also in that meantime, making sure that this project pencils and that $2 million will cover that gap. But again, I would urge you to ask Dwan those questions because I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Thoughts?
I don't know if this is for Dana or Dwan, but we heard a presentation from the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust tonight that significantly reduces the price of home ownership. Has there been any talk with those folks about helping us with this project? In terms of they're not going to help us build it, but in terms of bringing the cost down for people?
Dwan, I'll turn that over to you. I have not been in discussions with Kim about that.
Mayor and council, good evening. Yes, it has been an initial conversation with Kim. We didn't dive too deep, but it was just a casual conversation, knowing that this project is, soon to get off the ground. So there was an introduction made, but not too much after that.
Ben?
I'm just going to express my concerns here, and maybe you can react to it. So the council has authorized a pretty significant amount of funds for this project, and I think it's an important project, and obviously we all want to make sure this gets seen through successfully. The extension, no issues there. The community funds were donated for the purpose of creating a certain type of affordable housing at a certain price point. And what you are asking is for a reasonably significant increase in the price point of the units. And I don't disagree that there's a possibility that may be needed, but I kind of feel like what's missing here is some amount of updated financial analysis of what's happening with this project. What are the sales prices that you're expecting you will have now, given these new numbers here, and how much of the city funding are you expecting you're going to need, or all of it, or whatever. And I guess that's a long way of saying, is there some sort of high-level financial something that can be provided with this request so that we can understand what the finished product of this is going to be a little bit better?
So, yes. What I can say is that, 120 is kind of like our max as far as where we feel comfortable, and in talking with lenders, because we do believe that the city has been very generous with funds already been committed. It is our desire not to ask the city for additional funds, but that we are seeking funds outside of the city in order to make sure that that we get it to the finish line. Yes, we can submit financials. We can submit the pro forma for the project, and hopefully that would give the city a little, give you all a comfort level of where we are and how far we are from where we need to be, if we are far. Right now, I at the max, I don't see it being over 400,000. It could be at 4, a little over 4, but we're trying to keep it in a range where we can feel comfortable in saying that this is an affordable housing subdivision. You know, 4 is a bit high for me, but I think that we can get it lower to be able to serve the constituents in the manner in which we said we were going to use the money to serve them. So yes, we can. I'll send those over to you tonight in the morning, just as soon as we get off today.
Is there any particular urgency to this? Do you need this approved right away, or what do you need action from us tonight?
I think that would be great. We've already penciled in the groundbreaking for October the 19th at 2 p.m. We've already awarded or done a letter of intent with the general contractor, who is Oswood, and the subcontractors. So the wheels are moving, and it would, be advantageous if we could get those funds sooner rather than later.
Frank, I'm confused. What I understand from what I see in front of me is you want to move the project range from between 80 and 200% of AMI to 80 to 120%. So you're reducing the actual cost, or you're trying to increase the number of people in a lower part of the AMI, or the percentage AMI, to be able to afford these things. So theoretically, we're trying to reduce the price?
No, so the original agreement, actually, this is the amendment. So this is a correction to the amendment based on the information that the Housing Authority provided me today. So the original agreement actually states 80% to 120% with an average of 100%.
Okay.
So the only change that they're requesting is to increase the average up to 120% AMI. Which would, so you would then, so essentially you could have 100% at 120% AMI and it would average, but otherwise it'll average 120%. Otherwise, if you can have there's 22 units, so if you had 4 at 80% and the remainder at 120%, your average would still be less than that 120%. Right. And so what that does is it just serves a wider population, and it's not just the funding for the project. It comes down to qualifications and individuals being able to qualify for mortgages. It's not just interest rates and pricing, it's debt that individuals are carrying, and those at 80% AMI, if you have credit card debt, student loans, and vehicle payments, those are counted against you and will reduce what your mortgage is. Even if you're at 80% AMI, you have to have limited debt. And I think that's what they're finding at Trailview. That's why with the CLT that we saw tonight, why it helps pencil with that additional help from the federal loans or federal grant program. So anyways, the only change requested on the AMI is just to allow that average to go higher than 100% AMI.
But why set it at the maximum of the range? That would require 100% of those.
It's up to 100% AMI
So
average.
total flexibility.
It would be either all could be
Maximizes
100.
the flexibility.
It maximizes flexibility, but it also provides that, it should serve both ranges, but it doesn't say how many have to be 80%, how many have to be 100, how many at 120. It just allows them to work between that 100 to, because 100 essentially splits it 50-50 into the middle. And so when you have 22 units, you'd have to have 11 on each.
Can I just state something that should be obvious? Somebody at 80% AMI is not going to qualify for a mortgage of $400,000. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, we can put whatever numbers we want in there, but at that price point, we're not, nobody, you can't afford it. And so it would have to be, and if we're limiting it to 120% of AMI is the maximum based on other donors, even at 120% AMI, it would be a big stretch to be able to afford a home at $400,000 or a little bit over. I just don't, something's not making any sense to me here in how we're going about this.
Dwan, would it be possible for us to postpone this to the October 16th meeting, and in the interim, you can provide Dana with the pro forma as well as the price points for these 22 products?
Sure, that'd be fine.
It's not going to put you in a precarious situation with your lender or your development agreement?
No, it should not, no.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Counselor Quinnell. Further discussion? All those in, Dana, you good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay.
I just want to say I'm all for this $2 million going towards this project.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
That's not in
It's just
question.
the
I just
AMI.
want I want Warren to feel comfortable in that.
Yep, absolutely. We're all behind you here, Norm. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. We'll start with Counselor comments. Why don't we start on the right? Steve, anything this evening?
Just a couple of quick things based on postponing the discussion about the annexation. So we have 2 weeks, and what I'd like to see in that interim, or come back to us when we come back to that consideration, is clarifying as much as possible the developer agreement, including giving us some insight into a traffic study. So that would be for the developer potentially, or for planning staff to talk with them about what's going on, really. And then from our side, Angie, I think, clarify and seek opinions on what the law actually means in terms of what kind of commercial could go in there, based on either underlying zoning or whatever. And other than that, just a reminder that e-bikes are not allowed on the Whitefish Trail.
Thank you, Steve. Frank?
And I'd just like to chime into what Steve just said and add that, I mean, one of the keys for this, and I hope the developer gets this message, is that I think this is a great project. There are some unanswered questions that if, for example, we were able to have some assurances that they would have to come back in for conditional use permits for some of the commercial, if they wanted to do some of those things in that zone, that would be just fine with us. I think that would give us and the community a lot of clarity. And the other is, I think it is a fair thing for us to at least address or have addressed the traffic impacts and how to minimize those on Emerald Heights. I think that's fair, and I think you referenced it earlier, Craig, but I think one of the things that we would like to give, I think it would be helpful based on some of the things that were cited to us this evening by the residents of Emerald Heights. If part of the improvement of Emerald Heights by the developer is to take out some of that hill, I guess, going in there and out of there, that might do something. And then some way to otherwise avoid or disincentivize, my least favorite word in the world, people from using that as a cut through. But anyway, those are just things I heard that could be, that if there's any way to address them, I think that would go a long way to giving the community a big boost to support this thing.
Just to clarify my understanding first from Stephen Frank, you're asking us to have in the developer agreement the requirement of a traffic study to be completed. Because there's no way in 2 weeks, and really it's a week for us to get the packet ready.
Yeah.
There's really no way to have the traffic study done in 2 weeks.
They said they have a draft traffic study, so the developer mentioned that.
Right, okay,
So-
and they might have one they can provide, but again, our proposal is to have a city independent one done.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that should
Oh,
be
I see.
clarified
I
in
hear what
there.
you- Let's articulate that, and
Please.
that's what I'm suggesting. Let's give some teeth to
In the
this thing and
agreement.
yeah.
That they have to have a
Yeah.
traffic study, okay.
I mean, they're gonna have to have one anyway, as I understand it, given what's going on. Let's just make it clear. It would be my suggestion. Again, that clarifying and putting things in writing gives people at least something to point to and hold on to. And on a personal note, Mr. Thomas's comment about him not being able to trust this council, I would point out to him that there are an awful lot of developers that he's represented over the years in front of this council who cannot be trusted. So I think that runs a little both ways, and I don't think this council ought to put up with that, and I'm certainly not going to put up with it. So that's
you,
all I
Frank.
had to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ben?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. So today is the meeting that the problematic top-down state zoning comes to roost, it seems like. And, I'm going to point out a few obvious things in the big picture here. One of them is we have a zoning district called Transitional Zoning District that is apparently no longer transitional and is likely to be the source of some of the largest development in town. We have all these planning documents that talk about transitional zoning and small-scale commercial and these kinds of things. And I just don't know. I think that what came out of the legislature really has threw a bomb into this process that we spent how long and how many meetings trying to figure out a transitional zoning district, and it just feels like the whole thing just got canned. So it is where we are. The last thing I really want to do is talk about transitional zoning district again, but I just think that, I just think that here we are, and I think a lot of the stuff that we have painfully agreed on may not be applicable anymore, and I think at some point we're gonna have to rethink transitional zoning again. So just a thought. Other than that, we'll see what happens with this project, but in the big picture, we'll have to ponder on this later.
Thank you, Ben.
Just to add, Bet, so you guys understand, because of Senate Bill 382, where we go through the growth policy in a completely different fashion, my understanding from Kelly is that bills like 245 will not be something that we're held to once we've implemented 382. We get to choose the options for housing incentives. We have to have 5 of them. This can be one that is applied differently as long as we've met their requirements in 382. So in the long run, we face this, we face some of the other zoning bills that came through. 382 is under a whole new section of state law. This applies only under the zoning code, I believe. So Angie might be able to confirm that for me, but that was my discussions with Kelly during the legislative process, was all these bills coming out telling us what to do. Through 382, we'll actually be able to make a decision as a community which ones to apply. So it's temporary.
One other minor thing too is this land use decision is as consequential as any other one we do, and yet it doesn't go to the planning board, and that seems kind of weird to me too. So,
Rebecca?
Just one thing, on social media, there was a picture of a deer that had its mouth open, and someone mentioned chronic wasting disease. And I'm wondering if we could reach out to the Fish and Wildlife and Parks people and start working on that again, because, it's spread underneath fruit trees because it goes into the ground, and that's why it spreads so readily when the fruit drops onto the ground. And I just wondered how we do that now, because seems like 3 years ago that we met with them. Maybe it was only 2, where we were talking about putting together a chronic wasting disease protocol. And so I don't know which one of you guys wants to address. None of you want to address it because you're all tired. Okay.
Well, Bridger's working on that goal. He's kind of taken the lead, so I'll let him speak to where he's at. But we haven't stopped working on it. We've been working with them and have met and done a deer count. If you post like that, I would recommend, if you've seen something like that, forward it to FWP so they can take a look at it and decide if they need to go find that deer. It's hard, social media, you know, where the deer is located, et cetera. It's really hard for us as staff, but it's not a goal that's been completely put aside. It was a goal to look to see if a deer management plan was something feasible for whitefish. And Bridger, do you have anything else to add?
I don't have much of an update. The biologist has the deer count, the deer assessment that we did north on the viaduct, and I haven't had any communication with him of late in what that determined, but his busy season is summer and hunting season, and December is when we did that count, and so I'm hoping we'll get something soon and maybe do another assessment this winter, I guess, around December, but it is in his hands at this point, and we're waiting to get the feedback from it, the analysis of it, I guess.
And to test for chronic wasting disease, though, they have to cull the deer and test the deer once it's dead. Is that correct?
Correct. And what we do, if we find a deer in question, then we just request Fishing Wildlife to come up and take the sample and take it with them. They take the whole animal. You know, we haven't had any reports of such to the police department. I wouldn't recommend Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or any of those other things to report things. If you have a legitimate concern, call the police department, call Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We can get somebody there that can do something about it. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. I know we're going to be dealing with this a lot in the future with different issues with warming and other stuff, so thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andy?
Just to chime in, I agree with Ben. I think we're seeing the legislative actions of this past session play out in real time currently, and Dana is correct. I mean, we're going to have some options going forward, but we're a ways away from getting a growth policy adopted, like a while, and we can't sit here and say no to everything in the meantime, hoping that we'll have a better opportunity to have some say. And I think what we're going to have to really work on the next year and a half or so, for as long as it takes to get a growth policy, is work to the best of our ability with the limited set of tools we currently have in the toolbox. And the developer agreement on annexation is one of those, and I think we're going to have to be very conscious of that. We don't sit in a seat of power here when it comes to the decisions like we did at one time, I'm afraid. And I think we're going to all have to be conscious of that. And I look at that corner, and I'm not predisposing or anything else, and I look across the street, and it frightens me to death, quite frankly. So there you go. So.
Back to the annexation briefly. I know you're tired, Steve. I'm just, what are we hoping to realistically accomplish in the next 2 weeks when the packets need to be finalized here in the next 8 days? I mean, I envision if we're going to be viewing this developer agreement template as kind of our quasi way to condition this project, is my understanding. It seems as though there's going to be a lot of communication required between the city and the developer. And I just question realistically if that's going to be able to be accomplished in the next eight days.
Yeah, I agree. It's a short timeline.
Yeah, I think we can reach out and see what the developer's willing to do. I've already reached out actually tonight during the break to Kelly and then Thomas with the League of Cities and Towns to see what their interpretation of Senate Bill 245 is. We might not get it accomplished at the next meeting. I think it just kind of depends what their answer is. If they are reading Senate Bill the same way Dana and I read it. And if the developer is willing to offer some additional incentives in return for annexation, such as limiting the permitted uses for the multi-use portion of the project.
Would it be above board to request a meeting with the developer in a work session to discuss what those may be.
Sure, I think we could do it in a work session. I wouldn't say that we just meet with them as staff. If we wanted to do a public work session, I don't know what's available, Dana. I don't have the schedule up, but I mean, I don't think I think it might be a good topic of a work session rather than, staff, we can do so much, but we don't know what's on your folks' minds, and you're the ones who are making the decision.
Well, that's exactly right, and I just imagine us batting this thing back and forth for the next several meetings when a work session may be more useful and get us all on the same page to move this forward. Because I know I have a whole list of, issues, conditions that I would like to see integrated into the developers agreement, but I pretty much can hang my hat on the fact that they're not going to get woven in by the next meeting. And I don't really want to sit up here and legislate on the floor next meeting either.
So the next work session is open. Given the public attendance tonight, we will hold that work session in here, though. I don't see us holding it in the conference room. So it will still feel not like a work session because you cannot hear what's going on in that room when you sit out in this area. The sound doesn't travel.
And there's gonna
But I think the next work session is open, so you could do that, and then you've already continued that public hearing to the next meeting. So, if you can come to an agreement within that work session, then you can. I mean, again, this is a petition for annexation, so, he could turn down any developer agreement proposals you guys have and pull the annexation if he's not comfortable with them.
So if the city and Alberto could get on the same page, could he voluntarily bump this to the November 6th meeting?
I mean, we're not on a timeline.
Right.
There's no.
No, we're not on a
Would
timeline.
we have to revisit our motion this evening to provide you more time for that? Or is it something Alberto could volunteer?
You guys
You can
set it as a
volunteer,
date definite.
I was gonna say, you guys did postpone it to a date with the public hearing open, so for communication to the public, I think it's best, if your intent is to move it to the 6th, would be to move it to the 6th. I will say that agenda is pretty heavy as well, so no matter what meeting you're moving it to, you're gonna have a long night.
That's fine.
For the
I'm not-
next 3 meetings.
I'm just more concerned
or 2
about
meetings.
getting anything back in the next 8 days from Alberto.
Sure.
So with that said, can we reconsider the motion?
I mean, I just have a question. This is a quasi judicial matter, right? Can we have a discussion with the developer and kind of show our hand to him about things that we want and don't want? And
That would be a question for Angie.
If it's in a public meeting, yeah, correct. I mean, the reason that we have rules against quasi judicial, so you're not having this conversation outside of a public meeting. If it's transparent, if, the developer agreement, even if you guys come up with something with Alberto that you're happy with, it's still going to have to go through the public process. It's still going to have to be a hearing. It's still going to have to be approved or disapproved by you guys. So as long as you're not, and that's why I'm saying, if we're going to do it, let's do it in a public work session. So it is transparent and we're not, being accused of making deals behind the public's back with the developer.
So thanks Angie, is the council in agreement that let's hold a work session at the next meeting and then bump this to November 6th? Are you fine with that? Or not? No, let's just move this forward. I'm sorry, go ahead.
11 o'clock. Point of order.
Did you?
It's 11 o'clock.
Sure. Do we need a motion to reconsider that motion? Angie?
You do? Yes, you do.
Okay. Who would like to make that? That would again be to resolution 23-32, setting a workshop for October 16th, and then the public hearing again for the November 6th agenda.
I would move to reconsider the motion and to reset it for a work session on our next meeting and then for a vote on November 6th.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion? You guys have what you need to move forward? Okay, you'll mind reaching out to Alberto? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. That motion carries unanimously. Our business is done here tonight. Drive safely. We are adjourned.